Welcome, fellow wanderer of the shadowed seas, to a journey through the darkest corners of the One Piece world. Tonight, we delve beyond the surface of adventure and friendship into the theories that haunt the depths of this beloved tale. These are the whispers that chill the spine, the possibilities that lurk beneath Oda's masterful storytelling, theories of cannibalism, sacrifice, and secrets that reshape everything we thought we knew. So settle into the darkness. Let the gentle waves of unsettling possibility carry you toward rest, as we explore every shadow that dances behind the light of dreams and freedom. In the deepest waters of the Grand Line, where nightmares take physical form and legends are born from blood, there exists a man whose very existence challenges the fundamental laws that govern the world of pirates. Marshall D. Teach, known to the world as Blackbeard, stands as perhaps the most terrifying figure to emerge from the shadows of maritime history. Not merely for his overwhelming power or his ruthless ambition, but for the unspeakable methods by which he may have acquired the abilities that make him unique among all who sail the seas. The theory that haunts the darkest corners of pirate lore suggests that Blackbeard's unprecedented ability to wield multiple devil fruit powers stems from acts so vile, so fundamentally wrong, that they represent a corruption of the very bonds that hold civilized society together. This is not simply a tale of a man who broke the rules of devil fruit consumption through some quirk of genetics or fortunate circumstance. This is the story of someone who may have crossed the ultimate taboo, who may have consumed the flesh of those he called family in order to steal their power for himself. The evidence begins with the most pivotal moment in Blackbeard's rise to power, the death of Edward Newgate, the man known throughout the world as Whitebeard, the strongest pirate of his generation, and the closest thing to a father that Teach had ever known. On the blood-soaked battlefield of Marineford, as the War of the Best raged around them, and the very foundations of the world's power structure trembled, Blackbeard arrived not as a grieving son, seeking vengeance for his fallen patriarch, but as a vulture circling carrion, waiting for the perfect moment to claim his prize. The blanket that Blackbeard threw over Whitebeard's cooling corpse became the most significant piece of fabric in pirate history, concealing beneath its dark folds actions that may have been too horrific for even Oda's masterful storytelling to depict directly. What occurred in those crucial minutes remains one of the greatest mysteries in the One Piece world, but the results were undeniable. When Blackbeard emerged from beneath that shroud, he possessed the earth-shaking power of the Gura Gura no Mi, the very devil fruit that had made Whitebeard legendary. The conventional explanation for this transfer of power relies on the assumption that Blackbeard's unique physiology, his atypical body structure that allows him to remain sleepless and house what many believe to be multiple souls, somehow enables him to bypass the natural law that limits each person to a single devil fruit ability. But this explanation, while scientifically convenient, fails to address the deeper questions that surround the specific method by which this transfer occurred. Consider the logistics of the moment. Whitebeard's body remained intact after his death, showing no signs of the complete cellular breakdown that typically accompanies the departure of a devil fruit power from its host. The fruit itself did not manifest in the surrounding area, as devil fruits are known to do when their previous user dies, reincarnating into the nearest compatible fruit. Instead, the power appeared to flow directly from the deceased Whitebeard into the very much alive Blackbeard, suggesting a connection more intimate and immediate than any natural process should allow. The cannibalism theory provides a horrifyingly logical explanation for this unprecedented transfer. If Blackbeard's special body structure allows him not merely to house multiple devil fruit powers, but to absorb them through consumption of the previous user's flesh, then his actions beneath that blanket take on a significance far beyond mere opportunism. This would not have been simple grave robbing or even murder. It would have been the ultimate act of filial betrayal, the consumption of a father figure's heart in order to steal the power that had defined his legend. The historical precedent for such actions exists within the very inspiration that shaped Blackbeard's character. Marshall D. Teach models himself explicitly after Rox D. Zebek, the captain of the crew that had once brought together the most dangerous pirates of the previous generation. Zebek's reputation was built not merely on strength or strategic brilliance, but on his willingness to commit what the world considered the greatest taboos. The specific nature of these taboos has never been explicitly stated, but in a world where slavery, murder, and the destruction of entire islands are commonplace among pirates, what could be so fundamentally wrong that it would set Zebek apart from all other criminals? Cannibalism represents one of the few universal taboos that transcends cultural boundaries, a violation of human dignity so profound that it exists in the collective unconscious as an ultimate expression of moral corruption. If Zebek's reputation was built upon the systematic consumption of his enemies or even his allies, then Blackbeard's emulation of this practice would represent not innovation but inheritance, the continuation of a tradition too dark to be spoken of openly, even among pirates. The supporting evidence for this theory extends beyond Blackbeard himself to encompass other instances where devil fruit powers have been transferred through consumption of human flesh. Charlotte Linlin, known to the world as Big Mom, provides perhaps the most compelling parallel to Blackbeard's potential cannibalism. The circumstances surrounding her acquisition of the Soul fruit mirror those of Blackbeard's theft of Whitebeard's power in ways that are too significant to be dismissed as mere coincidence. During her 6th birthday celebration, young Linlin consumed not only the semla and other treats provided for the feast, but also Mother Carmel herself, the woman who had raised her and who possessed the very devil fruit powers that Linlin would later wield. Like Blackbeard's appropriation of Whitebeard's abilities, this transfer occurred without the natural process of fruit reincarnation, suggesting a direct consumption of both flesh and power that bypassed the normal mechanisms governing devil fruit inheritance. The fact that Oda chose not to depict either of these crucial moments directly speaks to the inherent horror of what may have transpired. The same artistic sensibility that allows him to explore themes of slavery, sexual assault, and systematic oppression, while maintaining certain boundaries, apparently draws the line at explicit depictions of cannibalism. The blanket that concealed Blackbeard's actions and the implied nature of Linlin's consumption of Mother Carmel represent artistic choices that acknowledge the existence of ultimate taboos while respecting the sensibilities of his audience. This pattern of concealment suggests that cannibalism occupies a special place in the hierarchy of One Piece's moral universe, too significant to ignore, too horrific to show, existing in the liminal space between implication and confirmation that allows readers to confront the possibility without being forced to witness its execution. The power of such storytelling lies not in graphic depiction, but in psychological suggestion, in the slow realization that beloved characters may be capable of acts that challenge every assumption about their fundamental nature. The mechanics of how cannibalistic consumption might enable devil fruit power transfer opens up disturbing avenues of speculation about the true nature of these mysterious abilities. If devil fruits truly represent the manifestation of human dreams and desires, as some theories suggest, then perhaps the consumption of the dreamer's flesh allows for a more complete absorption of their power than any external method could achieve. The heart, as the symbolic center of human emotion and will, might serve as the concentrated essence of a devil fruit user's connection to their ability. This theory gains additional credence when considered alongside Blackbeard's unusual relationship with sleep and consciousness. His apparent inability to sleep normally, his strange behavior patterns, and his crew's references to his unique body structure all point to someone whose internal state differs fundamentally from normal human physiology. If he has indeed consumed the hearts or flesh of multiple devil fruit users, then his body might house not just their powers but fragments of their consciousness, creating an internal landscape populated by the partially absorbed souls of his victims. The psychological implications of such a condition extend far beyond mere power acquisition into the realm of existential horror. Imagine existing in a constant state of internal conflict, where every decision must be negotiated not just with your own conscience, but with the lingering will of those you have consumed. Sleep becomes impossible not due to physical limitations, but because of the cacophony of voices that emerge when conscious control weakens, a form of self-inflicted sleep paralysis, where the demons are real and intimate. This internal multiplicity might explain Blackbeard's dramatic personality shifts, his ability to present himself as both cowardly, opportunist, and calculating mastermind, depending on the situation. If different aspects of his personality represent different consumed souls asserting temporary dominance, then his behavior patterns become not character inconsistencies, but evidence of a man whose very identity has become a battlefield where multiple wills compete for control. The broader implications of accepting cannibalism as a viable method for devil fruit power transfer reshape our understanding of the entire power structure that governs the One Piece world. If consumption of human flesh can bypass the normal limitations on devil fruit abilities, then every powerful individual becomes both predator and potential prey in a system where ultimate strength requires ultimate moral compromise. The bonds of trust that hold pirate crews together become meaningless when any member might view their crewmates not as family but as potential sources of power. This dynamic adds a layer of existential dread to every relationship in the series, transforming moments of apparent camaraderie into potential setups for future betrayal. When Blackbeard speaks of dreams and ambition, when he demonstrates knowledge of devil fruit mechanics that surpasses that of most experts, when he shows an uncanny ability to identify and pursue specific powers, all of these characteristics take on sinister overtones if they result from intimate familiarity with the taste of human flesh and the sensation of absorbing another's dreams through consumption. The religious and mythological frameworks that inform One Piece's deeper themes also support the cannibalism theory through their emphasis on consumption as a form of spiritual communion. In many traditions, the act of eating represents not merely physical sustenance, but the absorption of the consumed entity's essence, strength, and knowledge. If devil fruits operate according to spiritual rather than purely physical laws, then the consumption of a fruit user's flesh might represent the ultimate form of communion with their power, a literal incorporation of their abilities into the consumer's being. The darkness of this theory extends beyond individual acts of cannibalism to encompass the systematic nature of what Blackbeard's power accumulation might represent. If he has indeed consumed Whitebeard's heart to gain his devil fruit powers, then this was likely not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of predation that stretches back to his earliest days as a pirate. Every missing crew member, every unexplained disappearance, every moment when Blackbeard was alone with someone who possessed a useful ability, becomes suspect when viewed through the lens of systematic cannibalism. The calculating patience that Blackbeard demonstrated during his decades aboard Whitebeard's ship takes on a particularly chilling quality if his ultimate goal was always the consumption of his captain's power. Every moment of apparent loyalty, every gesture of filial affection, every instance of calling Whitebeard Pops becomes part of an elaborate deception designed to position himself for the ultimate betrayal. The family bonds that pirates value above all else become tools of manipulation in the hands of someone willing to literally consume those who trust him. This recontextualization of Blackbeard's relationship with the Whitebeard pirates transforms their dynamic from a tale of betrayal for abstract ideological reasons into something far more personal and horrifying. Teacher's defection was not motivated by disagreement with Whitebeard's methods or ambition for independent command, but by hunger, a literal, physical craving for the power that could only be satisfied through consumption of his father figure's flesh. The implications ripple outward to affect our understanding of every other relationship in the series. If cannibalism represents a viable path to power, then the trust that binds crews together becomes a luxury that only the weak can afford. The strong must always remain vigilant against the possibility that their closest allies might be measuring them not for coffins but for cooking pots, evaluating their worth, not in terms of friendship, but in terms of the power their consumption might provide. As we delve deeper into this theory's ramifications, we begin to understand why it resonates so powerfully, despite its horrific nature. It represents the ultimate corruption of everything that One Piece holds sacred: family bonds, trust, shared dreams. The idea that strength should protect, rather than prey upon those around it. Blackbeard's potential cannibalism is not merely a method of power acquisition, but a perversion of the very values that make piracy appealing as a lifestyle choice in Oda's world. The tragedy of this theory lies not just in what Blackbeard may have done, but in how it transforms our understanding of what he might do next. Every new crew member who joins his forces, every alliance he forms, every moment of apparent vulnerability he shows, becomes potentially calculated preparation for future consumption. The Blackbeard pirates are not a crew in the traditional sense, but a collection of future meals, each member valuable primarily for the power they might provide when properly prepared and consumed. In the deepest recesses of Toto Land, where candy architecture conceals horrors that would make even the most hardened pirates weep, there exists a truth so disturbing that it challenges every assumption we might hold about the nature of identity, consciousness, and the price of power. Charlotte Linlin, the woman the world knows as Big Mom, may not be the person she appears to be at all. Instead, she may serve as nothing more than a vessel, a living prison for the malevolent spirit of Mother Carmel, the woman who raised her and whose consumption may have resulted in something far more sinister than simple devil fruit power transfer. The evidence for this possession theory lies woven throughout the fabric of Big Mom's existence, hidden in plain sight like poison dissolved in sweetened tea. Her dramatic personality shifts, her sudden transitions between childlike innocence and calculated cruelty, her moments of apparent amnesia, where she becomes someone entirely different. All of these characteristics point toward a consciousness that houses more than one soul, more than one set of memories, more than one fundamental understanding of right and wrong. To understand the full horror of what may have occurred during that fateful 6th birthday celebration on Elbaf, we must first examine the true nature of the woman who called herself Mother Carmel. Far from the benevolent nun she pretended to be, Carmel operated one of the most sophisticated human trafficking networks in the world, a business that specialized in the procurement and sale of children to the world government for purposes too dark to contemplate fully. Her reputation as a holy woman, her apparent ability to negotiate peace between warring giants, her establishment of the Sheep's House orphanage, all of these noble deeds served as elaborate camouflage for activities that represented the very worst of human exploitation. The children who came under Carmel's care were not rescued but harvested, not saved but processed for eventual delivery to buyers who valued youth, innocence, and the specific racial characteristics that made certain children particularly desirable to their clientele. The sheep's house was never a sanctuary but a sorting facility, where human beings too young to understand their fate were prepared for lives of servitude, experimentation, or worse. That such evil could disguise itself so thoroughly behind the symbols of religious devotion speaks to a level of calculation and moral corruption that transcends simple criminal enterprise. Linlin, even as a child, represented something unique in Carmel's collection. Not merely another product to be sold, but a weapon of unprecedented potential, whose innocent nature made her all the more valuable to those who understood how such innocence could be corrupted and directed. Her superhuman strength, her apparent inability to understand the consequences of her actions, her complete trust in the woman who fed and sheltered her. All of these qualities made her both priceless and dangerous in ways that Carmel may not have fully appreciated until it was too late. The soul fruit that Carmel possessed granted her abilities that went far beyond simple animation of inanimate objects or the creation of homies from harvested lifespan. At its deepest level, this devil fruit power operated on the fundamental forces that bind consciousness to flesh, that define the boundaries between self and other, that determine where one soul ends and another begins. In the hands of someone as thoroughly evil as Mother Carmel, such power represented tools for manipulation that extended into realms of psychological control that few could imagine and fewer still could resist. The fateful birthday celebration where everything changed began as it always did, with Carmel orchestrating events to serve her broader purposes while maintaining the facade of maternal care that had served her so well for so many years. The semla, that traditional Elbaf treat that represented the giant culture's approach to communal celebration, sat arranged on tables alongside other delicacies designed to create an atmosphere of joy and abundance. But beneath the surface festivities, darker currents moved as Carmel prepared for what may have been intended as Linlin's final performance before her sale to government buyers. The eating frenzy that followed was not unusual for Linlin, whose appetite had always been legendary even among the giants who prided themselves on their capacity for consumption. But this time, something went wrong with Carmel's calculations. The woman who had spent years manipulating the innocent giant child found herself caught up in the very appetite she had helped cultivate, consumed along with the treats she had arranged, devoured by the monster she had helped create. The traditional interpretation of these events focuses on the accidental nature of Linlin's consumption of Mother Carmel, treating it as a tragic mishap that resulted in the transfer of devil fruit powers through mechanisms that remain poorly understood. But this explanation fails to account for the specific changes in Linlin's personality that occurred after that day, transformations that went far beyond simple power acquisition to encompass fundamental alterations in her approach to relationships, morality, and the value of human life. Where young Linlin had been innocent despite her strength, adult Big Mom became calculating in ways that echoed Carmel's own manipulative intelligence. Where the child had been genuinely caring toward those around her, the pirate captain began treating people as resources to be harvested, their emotions and life force serving as raw materials for her homey creation. Most tellingly, where Linlin had once been content with simple pleasures and genuine affection, Big Mom developed an obsession with family that took on distinctly possessive and controlling characteristics that mirrored Carmel's own approach to managing her collection of children. The soul fruit's abilities provide a mechanism by which such personality transfer might occur, its powers operating on levels of consciousness that transcend simple physical interaction between fruit user and target. If Carmel possessed sufficient knowledge of her devil fruit's deeper capabilities, she might have prepared contingencies for exactly this type of situation, embedding aspects of her consciousness within her soul-based powers in ways that would ensure her survival, even if her physical body was destroyed. The process would not have been immediate or complete, requiring time for Carmel's embedded consciousness to assert increasing control over her unwilling host. The gradual nature of this possession would explain the periods during Big Mom's life where she seemed to remember her earlier, gentler nature, moments when Linlin's original personality managed to surface despite the growing influence of her parasitic tenant. These episodes of apparent amnesia or personality regression may represent not medical conditions but spiritual warfare, the original soul fighting desperately to reclaim control of her own body. The evidence for this ongoing internal conflict appears most clearly during the Wano arc, when physical trauma temporarily disrupts whatever mechanisms allow Carmel's consciousness to maintain dominance over Linlin's original personality. The woman who emerges from this period of amnesia bears no resemblance to the cruel empress who had terrorized the New World for decades. Instead, she displays the same gentle caring, the same innocent joy in simple pleasures, the same protective instincts toward children that had characterized young Linlin before her 6th birthday changed everything. This temporary return to her original nature reveals just how thoroughly Carmel's influence has corrupted the adult Big Mom, transforming someone whose natural instincts ran toward protection and nurturing into a figure whose motherhood becomes possessive domination, whose care manifests as control, whose love expresses itself through the harvesting of souls from those too weak to resist. The contrast between these two versions of the same person is so stark that it becomes difficult to view them as natural evolution rather than evidence of external corruption. The specific techniques that Big Mom employs in combat provide additional support for the possession theory, particularly her ultimate attack known as the 3,000 Leagues of Misery. This devastating technique manifests not as an abstract expression of her devil fruit powers, but as a direct manifestation of Mother Carmel herself, the dead woman's image appearing to deliver judgment upon Big Mom's enemies. The choice of this particular form for her most powerful attack cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence or subconscious imagery. It represents the surfacing of Carmel's consciousness at moments of peak emotional intensity. The name of the attack itself carries significance that extends beyond simple reference to distance or suffering. 3,000 Leagues Searching for Mother represents a classic work that explores themes of separation, loss, and the desperate journey to reunite with parental figures who may not deserve the devotion they inspire. The irony embedded in this reference becomes particularly cruel when viewed through the lens of possession theory. Big Mom's ultimate attack is named for a story about searching for a mother, while she herself has become the unwilling vessel for the very woman who betrayed her maternal trust. The psychological mechanisms that would allow such possession to occur find their roots in the same trust and dependency that made young Linlin such an ideal victim for Carmel's trafficking operations. Children who have been systematically manipulated by parental figures develop complex attachments that persist even in the face of abuse, their need for approval and affection making them vulnerable to influence that extends far beyond normal psychological manipulation. If Carmel's consciousness retained access to these emotional pathways after her physical death, she would possess tools for control that operated at levels deeper than rational thought. The soul fruit's power to interact with the fundamental essence of living beings might provide the mechanism by which such deep psychological influence could persist across the boundary of death. If souls truly represent the core identity of individuals, then someone with sufficient mastery of soul manipulation might be able to embed aspects of their own consciousness within another person's spiritual essence, creating a form of immortality that comes at the cost of another's autonomy. This parasitic form of existence would explain many of Big Mom's most disturbing characteristics, particularly her treatment of her own children as extensions of her will, rather than independent individuals deserving of love and respect. Carmel's approach to the children in her care had always been fundamentally utilitarian, viewing them as products to be shaped and sold rather than human beings with their own needs and desires. This same perspective appears in Big Mom's management of her vast family, where children are valued primarily for their usefulness in advancing her political and territorial ambitions. The cycles of abuse that characterize Big Mom's relationships with her offspring take on additional significance when viewed as manifestations of Carmel's continuing influence. The woman who had spent her life selling children to those who would exploit them now shapes a new generation to serve her posthumous ambitions, their individual dreams and desires subordinated to the greater project of building an empire that serves as monument to her corrupted vision of maternal care. The homies that populate Totoland represent perhaps the most visible manifestation of this corrupted nurturing instinct. Inanimate objects given life through the harvesting of souls from Big Mom's subjects, forced to serve as eternal children who can never grow beyond their creator's control. These artificial beings embody the ultimate expression of Carmel's philosophy: life as performance, existence as service to another's will, consciousness as commodity to be shaped and directed according to external desires. The horror of Big Mom's condition extends beyond personal tragedy to encompass broader implications for everyone who encounters her, friend and enemy alike. Those who seek alliance with her must contend not only with her legendary strength and political resources, but with the possibility that they are negotiating not with Charlotte Linlin, but with the ghost of a human trafficker whose evil transcends death itself. Every agreement becomes suspect, every moment of apparent maternal affection potentially calculated manipulation, designed to serve purposes that may not become clear until it is too late to escape their consequences. The dramatic irony that defines Big Mom's existence, her complete ignorance of the true circumstances surrounding her acquisition of devil fruit powers, becomes even more poignant when viewed through the possession theory. She genuinely does not understand what happened during that 6th birthday celebration, not because the events were too traumatic to remember clearly, but because her original consciousness was already beginning to be suppressed by the time coherent memory formation became possible. The child who might have retained some awareness of consuming Mother Carmel was systematically eliminated by the very consciousness that the consumption had introduced. This ignorance serves Carmel's posthumous interests perfectly, ensuring that Big Mom never develops sufficient self-awareness to recognize the foreign influence operating within her mind, or to take steps to resist its growing dominance. The loyal daughter continues to honor her adoptive mother's memory, even as that same mother's spirit works to erase every trace of the innocent child she once was, replacing genuine emotion with calculated performance, natural affection with manipulative control, protective instinct with possessive domination. The few moments when Big Mom's original personality manages to surface serve as heartbreaking glimpses of who Charlotte Linlin might have become if her development had not been derailed by Carmel's malevolent influence. The genuine care she shows for Tama during her amnesia episode, her innocent joy in simple activities, her protective response to seeing children in danger, all of these reactions represent echoes of a person whose natural instincts ran toward nurturing rather than exploitation, whose strength might have been used to shelter rather than dominate those around her. The tragedy of Big Mom's condition lies not merely in what she has become, but in what she has lost, not just in the evil she perpetrates, but in the good she might have accomplished if her fundamental nature had been allowed to develop without corruption. The woman who terrorizes the New World represents not natural evolution but artificial perversion, not chosen evil, but imposed malevolence that serves purposes she does not even understand. As we contemplate the full implications of Mother Carmel's potential posthumous possession of Charlotte Linlin, we confront one of the darkest possibilities embedded within the One Piece world. That evil of sufficient magnitude can transcend even death itself, that the bonds between souls can be corrupted to serve purposes that make a mockery of everything that should be sacred about human connection, that even the most innocent victims can become unwilling instruments of the very forces that first destroyed their capacity for genuine happiness and authentic relationship. In the ancient skies above the White Sea, where gold and memory intertwine beneath clouds that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, lies hidden perhaps the most disturbing truth about the origins of devil fruit powers. A truth so horrific that it transforms our understanding of these miraculous abilities from divine gifts into monuments to unthinkable sacrifice. The theory that devil fruits were born from the systematic murder of children during the Void Century represents not merely speculation about fictional powers, but a meditation on how the deepest human evils can disguise themselves as progress, how the most profound violations of innocence can be justified through appeals to necessity and the greater good. The foundation for this terrifying possibility emerges from the Skypiea Arc's exploration of ancient history, specifically the flashback sequences that reveal the relationship between Mont Blanc Noland and the Shandian warrior Kalgara. What appears on the surface to be a simple story of cultural misunderstanding and eventual friendship carries within it implications that extend far beyond the immediate narrative, serving as what many theorists believe to be subtle foreshadowing for revelations about the world's darkest secrets that have yet to be fully unveiled. The pivotal moment occurs when Noland discovers that the Shandians are preparing to sacrifice Kalgara's daughter to appease what they believe to be a curse afflicting their land. The ritual itself follows patterns that echo sacrificial practices found throughout human history, but with specific elements that seem designed to draw attention to their symbolic significance rather than their practical function. The child chosen for sacrifice is innocent, beloved, and represents the future of her people, qualities that make her death particularly meaningful to whatever forces are believed to require such tribute. The serpent god Kashigami, that Noland ultimately slays, serves as more than merely a convenient explanation for the Shandians' misfortunes. It represents the type of false deity that demands the blood of children, the malevolent force that masquerades as divine will, while serving only its own appetite for destruction. The symbolic connections between serpents and biblical imagery of temptation and evil provide layers of meaning that extend far beyond the immediate story, suggesting that Oda is drawing upon archetypal patterns that resonate across cultures and throughout history. The Christian themes that permeate One Piece become particularly significant when viewed through the lens of this sacrifice theory. Bartholomew Kuma's constant reading of his Bible, his role as a former priest who became a revolutionary, his ultimate sacrifice of his own consciousness to protect those he loved. All of these elements establish a framework where religious symbolism serves not as mere decoration, but as genuine exploration of theological concepts. The world government's establishment of the Holy Land Mariehua, complete with its own version of religious authority, creates a parallel structure that mirrors and perverts genuine spiritual truth. The Tree of Knowledge on Ohara, whose destruction marked one of the world government's most heinous crimes, bears obvious connections to biblical imagery of forbidden knowledge and the consequences of seeking truth that those in power prefer to keep hidden. The scholars who died defending their library were not merely academics, but keepers of secrets so dangerous that their very existence threatened the foundations upon which the current world order was built. Their systematic elimination represents the same impulse that drives authorities to silence those who would reveal inconvenient truths about the origins of power. Within this framework of religious symbolism and hidden truth, the theory of sacrificial devil fruit origins takes on dimensions that extend far beyond simple speculation about fictional powers. If the fruits truly represent the manifestation of human dreams and desires, as suggested by various clues throughout the series, then the method by which these dreams were first captured and crystallized becomes a question of fundamental moral importance. The innocence required for pure dreams, the intensity of emotion necessary for lasting manifestation, the finality needed to prevent the dreamer from reclaiming their vision. All of these requirements point toward children as the ideal subjects for such a horrific process. The ancient kingdom that once existed during the Void Century appears to have possessed technological and spiritual capabilities that far exceeded anything available in the present world, achievements that required knowledge and power sources that modern civilization has lost or deliberately abandoned. The systematic erasure of this civilization's history suggests that their methods, whatever they were, resulted in consequences so terrible that even their enemies found it necessary to hide the truth rather than simply claiming victory over inferior opponents. The D-clan's connection to this lost civilization, their reputation as the natural enemies of the gods, their apparent inheritance of will that transcends normal generational boundaries, all of these characteristics suggest that they were either perpetrators or victims of whatever process created devil fruits. The will of D that manifests in individuals like Luffy, Ace, and Dragon may represent not inherited genetic traits, but fragments of consciousness preserved through the same mechanisms that created the fruits, the dreams of sacrificed children living on through their descendants. The timing of devil fruit appearances in the world's history supports this interpretation, with the oldest known fruits dating back to the Void Century period, when the ancient kingdom flourished and fell. The absence of clear documentation about fruit origins, despite the meticulous record-keeping that characterizes other aspects of the world's history, suggests deliberate concealment rather than simple loss of information over time. The world government's systematic suppression of Void Century research indicates that the truth about this period poses an existential threat to their authority. The specific nature of devil fruit powers provides additional support for the sacrifice theory through their apparent connection to deeply held dreams and desires, rather than arbitrary supernatural abilities. Each fruit seems to embody not just practical capabilities, but emotional and psychological themes that resonate with fundamental human experiences. The desire to stretch beyond limitations, to control fire and ice, to heal and harm, to transform and transcend. These are not the random products of natural forces, but the concentrated essence of human aspiration, crystallized at the moment of ultimate loss. The process by which such crystallization might occur returns us to the Shandian sacrifice ritual and its implications for understanding how innocent dreams could be captured and preserved. The moment of death, particularly death faced by children who have not yet learned to compromise their deepest wishes with practical limitations, might represent the optimal condition for fixing pure dreams into permanent form. The intense emotions accompanying such sacrifice, the terror, the betrayal, the desperate final wish for salvation or revenge, could provide the spiritual energy necessary to transform abstract desires into tangible supernatural abilities. The serpent symbolism that appears throughout One Piece takes on additional significance when viewed through this lens of sacrificial origins. From the Kashigami that demanded Kalgara's daughter to the world nobles who consider themselves gods deserving of worship, the pattern of false deities demanding tribute from their subjects establishes a framework where the powerful maintain their position through the systematic exploitation of the innocent. The serpent represents not just evil in general, but the specific evil of those who pervert protective relationships into predatory ones. Imu's role as the hidden ruler of the world government, the figure who sits upon the empty throne and commands even the five elders, suggests a connection to whatever process created devil fruits that extends beyond simple political authority. The title of sea god that some theories attribute to this mysterious figure implies divine authority over the oceans where devil fruit users lose their power, a dominion that might stem from their role in creating these cursed abilities in the first place. If Imu orchestrated the original sacrifice rituals that created devil fruits, their current position represents not usurpation of authority, but continuation of the same system that has always governed the world. The specific targeting of D-Clan members for these theoretical rituals would explain both their current status as natural enemies of the world government and their apparent inheritance of unusual will and determination. The children sacrificed to create devil fruits might have belonged primarily to this bloodline, chosen for qualities that made their dreams particularly pure or powerful. The guilt associated with this systematic murder of their own kind could be what drives the surviving D-Clan members to oppose the world order that benefited from their sacrifice, their inherited will representing not just genetic predisposition, but spiritual obligation to avenge their murdered ancestors. The Revolutionary Army's goals take on new dimensions when viewed through this framework. Their mission to overthrow the world government, potentially representing not just political reform, but spiritual justice for crimes committed centuries ago. Dragon's status as Luffy's father and Garp's son creates a generational chain that connects the present struggle to whatever occurred during the Void Century, suggesting that the revolution he leads is not innovation, but restoration, not reform but revenge for ancient wrongs that have never been properly addressed. The emotional weight carried by characters like Robin, whose entire life has been shaped by the world government's determination to prevent Void Century research, becomes more understandable when the stakes are raised from mere historical curiosity to moral reckoning with systematic child murder. The scholars of Ohara were not killed simply for possessing dangerous knowledge, but for approaching truths that would expose the foundations of current civilization as built upon the bones of innocence, their research representing existential threat to a system that can only maintain legitimacy by concealing the methods used to establish its power. The parallel between ancient sacrifice, rituals, and modern world government practices establishes continuity between past and present that suggests the same essential evil continues to operate under different forms. The systematic oppression of certain populations, the casual disposal of lives deemed inconvenient to official policy, the willingness to commit atrocities in service of maintaining order. All of these contemporary practices echo the mentality that would have made child sacrifice seem acceptable to those who benefited from its results. The devil fruits themselves become not gifts to be celebrated, but curses to be understood. Each power representing not miraculous ability, but permanent reminder of innocence destroyed in service of others' ambitions. Every time a devil fruit user manifests their abilities, they channel the final dreams of children who died before they could see those dreams fulfilled, their powers serving as both tribute to the sacrificed and indictment of the system that killed them. The theoretical connection between devil fruit origins and child sacrifice transforms our understanding of these abilities from symbols of empowerment to monuments of exploitation, from proof of the world's magical potential to evidence of its capacity for systematic evil. The users who wield these powers unknowingly carry the weight of ancient crimes, their strength built upon foundations of suffering that they have no opportunity to comprehend or address. As we contemplate the full implications of this theory, we confront not just speculation about fictional powers, but meditation on real-world patterns of exploitation. that continue to shape human civilization. The powerful have always found ways to justify their consumption of the powerless, their transformation of others' dreams into personal advantage, their ability to build monuments to their own glory using the broken bodies of those too small to resist effectively. If devil fruits truly originated from child sacrifice during the Void Century, they serve as perfect metaphor for how the most beautiful aspects of human potential can emerge from the ugliest forms of human cruelty, how the dreams we celebrate may rest upon nightmares we prefer to forget. In the quiet dojo of Shimotsuki Village, where the sound of wooden practice swords once echoed with the dreams of children who believed that determination alone could overcome any limitation, there lies a tragedy so profound that it challenges every assumption we might hold about the nature of hope, perseverance, and the weight that impossible dreams can place upon young shoulders. The death of Quina represents more than the simple accident that official accounts suggest. It may stand as evidence of how even the strongest spirits can be broken when confronted with limitations that no amount of training or willpower can overcome. The theory that Quina took her own life, rather than falling victim to some mundane accident, requires us to examine not just the circumstances of her death, but the psychological landscape that shaped her final days. The accumulated pressure of watching her dearest friends surpass abilities she had spent her entire existence developing, the crushing realization that the dream which had defined her identity might be nothing more than childish fantasy, doomed to remain forever unfulfilled. To understand the full weight of what Quina may have faced in her final moments, we must first examine the conversation that preceded her death, that last exchange with Zoro, where she attempted to articulate fears and frustrations that had been building within her for months as she watched him grow stronger while she remained trapped within the limitations that her father insisted would always define her potential. The words she spoke that night carried depths of despair that Zoro, in his youthful optimism and genuine affection for his rival, may not have fully comprehended. Her declaration that she would never be able to become the world's strongest swordsman because she was a girl represented more than simple acknowledgement of physical disadvantages. It reflected the systematic undermining of her confidence that Koshiro had inflicted through years of well-intentioned but ultimately destructive commentary about the limitations that gender would impose upon her aspirations. The father who should have been her greatest supporter had instead become the voice in her head that whispered constantly about why her dreams were impossible, why her efforts were ultimately futile, why she should accept lesser ambitions more appropriate to her circumstances. The psychological damage inflicted by such systematic discouragement cannot be understated, particularly when it comes from someone whose opinion carries the weight of parental authority and professional expertise. Koshiro's pronouncements about female limitations in swordsmanship were not delivered as casual observations, but as fundamental truths about the nature of reality, immutable laws that Quina could no more overcome than she could alter the rotation of the earth or the flow of time itself. The timing of these revelations, coming just as Quina was beginning to notice Zoro's rapid improvement, created a psychological perfect storm that would have challenged even the most resilient adult, let alone a child whose entire identity had been built around her exceptional abilities with a blade. The girl who had defined herself as the strongest, who had found purpose and meaning in her superiority over every other student in the dojo, suddenly faced the prospect of watching that superiority evaporate as biological differences began to assert themselves with increasing force. The speed of Zoro's development would have been particularly devastating to someone who had grown accustomed to effortless dominance in their chosen field. Where Quina had once been able to defeat him through superior technique and experience, she now found herself forced to exert maximum effort simply to maintain parity with someone who seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The inevitable trajectory was clear. Soon, no amount of skill or knowledge would be sufficient to compensate for the physical advantages that Zoro would develop as he matured. The conversation they shared on that final night represents Kuina's attempt to articulate these fears to the one person who might understand their significance, but also her recognition that even Zoro, despite his genuine care for her, could not truly comprehend the existential crisis she faced. His protests about her strength, his insistence that gender made no difference, his promise to continue their rivalry regardless of what anyone else might say. All of these responses, while motivated by love and admiration, ultimately missed the point of what she was trying to communicate. Kuina was not seeking reassurance about her current abilities or encouragement about her potential for future growth. She was sharing her dawning realization that the fundamental organizing principle of her entire existence was built upon a foundation that could not support the weight of her ultimate ambitions. The dream of becoming the world's strongest swordsman was not simply difficult or unlikely, it was, according to everyone whose opinion mattered, literally impossible for someone like her to achieve. The smile she maintained throughout their conversation, the way she seemed to accept Zoro's encouragement and agree to continue pursuing their shared goal, takes on sinister significance when viewed through the lens of someone who had already made their final decision. People contemplating suicide often display remarkable composure in their final interactions with others, having found peace in the resolution of their internal conflict even as they work to ensure that their loved ones remain unaware of what they have decided to do. The promise she extracted from Zoro that one of them would become the world's strongest swordsman carries particular weight when interpreted as her way of ensuring that their shared dream would survive even if she could not. By transferring the full burden of their mutual ambition to him, she freed herself from the responsibility of continuing to struggle against limitations that had been defined as insurmountable, while simultaneously giving meaning to what she may have already decided would be her final sacrifice. The location where she was found, at the bottom of stairs in her own home, suggests someone who sought a method that would appear accidental, sparing her family and friends the additional grief that would accompany knowledge of intentional self-harm. The choice of stairs as the mechanism reflects careful consideration of what would be believable, while ensuring that the outcome would be final, preventing any possibility of rescue or intervention that might complicate her plans. The implausibility of the accident explanation becomes more apparent when we consider Kuina's exceptional physical coordination and spatial awareness, abilities that should have made a fatal fall down familiar stairs, highly unlikely under normal circumstances. Someone who could execute complex sword techniques requiring precise balance and timing would not typically lose their footing on steps they had navigated thousands of times before, particularly not in ways that would result in injuries severe enough to cause death. The aftermath of her death reveals patterns consistent with a community that either suspected the truth or chose to accept a comfortable fiction rather than confront the more disturbing reality of what had occurred. The speed with which the accident explanation was accepted, the lack of detailed investigation into the circumstances, the immediate focus on honoring her memory rather than understanding her final moments. All of these responses suggest a collective decision to preserve everyone's emotional well-being by avoiding questions that might lead to uncomfortable answers. Zoro's reaction to news of her death provides perhaps the most poignant evidence for the suicide theory. His immediate assumption of responsibility for carrying forward their shared dream, suggesting that some part of him understood the true nature of what had occurred, even if he could not consciously acknowledge it. His vow to become so strong that his name would be heard in heaven implies recognition that Kuina had deliberately placed herself beyond the reach of earthly competition, that she had chosen a form of escape that made their rivalry impossible to continue in any conventional sense. The psychological profile that emerges from careful examination of Queena's final days reveals someone experiencing the classic symptoms of what modern psychology would recognize as severe depression, triggered by the collapse of fundamental assumptions about identity and future possibilities. The loss of purpose that accompanied her realization about gender-based limitations, the isolation that came from being unable to share these concerns with anyone who could truly understand them, the hopelessness that resulted from seeing no viable path forward. All of these factors created conditions where suicide might have seemed like the only solution to problems that felt insurmountable. The perfectionism that had driven Quina to excel in swordsmanship may have worked against her when confronted with limitations that no amount of effort could overcome. Her inability to accept anything less than absolute success, making compromise or alternative goals feel like forms of failure rather than reasonable adaptations to changing circumstances. For someone whose entire identity had been built around being the best, the prospect of becoming merely very good would have represented not just disappointment, but fundamental dissolution of everything that made life meaningful. The social isolation that accompanied her growing awareness of her limitations would have intensified the psychological pressure she faced. Her inability to discuss these concerns openly with parents, teachers, or peers, leaving her to struggle alone with thoughts that grew darker and more overwhelming with each passing day. The stigma surrounding mental health issues in traditional societies often prevents those who most need support from seeking or receiving the help that might allow them to find alternative solutions to their problems. The gender dynamics that shaped Quina's understanding of her limitations reflect broader social patterns that continue to damage young people who find themselves trapped between personal ambitions and cultural expectations about what is appropriate or possible for people of their demographic. The tragedy lies not just in her individual struggle, but in the systemic forces that made her feel as though her dreams were inherently invalid, rather than simply requiring different approaches or alternative definitions of success. The timing of her death, occurring just as she was beginning to articulate her fears to Zoro, suggests someone who had reached the limit of their ability to cope with internal conflict and saw no benefit in prolonging the struggle. The decision to end her life may have felt like mercy rather than tragedy, relief rather than loss, the final solution to problems that had grown beyond her ability to manage or resolve through any other means. The impact of Quina's death on Zoro's subsequent development reveals how suicide affects not just the individual who dies, but everyone who cared about them, creating wounds that may never fully heal, while simultaneously providing motivation that shapes entire lifetimes. His dedication to fulfilling their shared promise carries within it both tribute to her memory and acknowledgement of the guilt that comes from surviving when someone you love could not find reasons to continue living. The broader implications of accepting this theory extend beyond individual tragedy to encompass questions about how society supports young people facing existential crises related to identity, purpose, and future possibilities. The pressures that may have driven Quina to take her own life continue to affect children and adolescents who find themselves caught between personal dreams and social limitations, their struggles often invisible to adults who assume that youth provides natural resilience against such despair. The lesson embedded within this darkest interpretation of Quina's death is not that dreams should be abandoned when they prove difficult to achieve, but that support systems must be strengthened to help young people navigate the complex process of adapting their ambitions to realistic possibilities without losing hope or self-worth. The tragedy lies not in having impossible dreams, but in facing those impossibilities alone, without guidance or support that might help transform disappointment into redirection rather than despair. As we contemplate the possibility that Queena's death was not accident but choice, we confront one of the most painful aspects of human existence: the recognition that sometimes love and encouragement, no matter how sincere, are insufficient to prevent those we care about from reaching conclusions that we cannot understand or accept. Her story serves as a reminder that even the strongest spirits can be broken when the weight of limitation becomes heavier than the hope for transcendence, that even the most determined dreamers can lose faith when the gap between aspiration and possibility grows too wide to bridge. In the twilight hours of a world forever changed, when the last echoes of adventure have faded into memory and the grand seas have claimed most of those who dared to dream impossible dreams, there may remain only one witness to the greatest story ever told: a living skeleton whose cursed immortality has transformed him from musician into chronicler, from crew member into the sole keeper of legends that will otherwise die with those who lived them. The theory that Brook serves as the narrator of One Piece, telling the completed story from some distant future where he alone survives to remember, casts the entire saga in shadows of inevitable loss that make every moment of joy precious, precisely because it cannot last forever. The foundations of this theory rest upon the unique nature of Brook's devil fruit powers, abilities that grant him a form of immortality, fundamentally different from any other supernatural gift bestowed by these mysterious fruits. While his Yomi Yomi no Mi technically brought him back from death only once, the skeletal form he now inhabits appears to be immune to the natural aging process that claims all other living beings. His bones may be broken, his soul may be wounded, but the simple passage of time holds no terror for someone who has already experienced death and returned to tell the tale. This immunity to natural death places Brook in the unique position of being able to outlive not just his current crewmates, but potentially entire generations of pirates, marines, and civilians who will rise and fall while he continues his eternal existence. The tragic irony of his situation becomes apparent when we consider that his greatest desire, to reunite with Laboon, may ultimately be fulfilled only to lead to another cycle of loss. The whale's eventual death leaving Brook once again alone with memories of friends who have passed beyond his ability to reach them. The narrative structure of One Piece itself provides supporting evidence for this theory through its occasional use of an omniscient narrator who possesses knowledge of future events and their significance. The voice that introduces major story arcs, that provides context for historical events, that sometimes hints at outcomes before they occur, speaks with the authority of someone who has witnessed the complete story, rather than someone experiencing it for the first time. This narrative perspective aligns perfectly with what we might expect from Brook telling the tale decades or centuries after its conclusion. The foreshadowing that permeates the series takes on different significance when viewed through the lens of retrospective narration, each hint about future developments representing not authorial planning, but the natural tendency of a storyteller to embed meaning in earlier events based on knowledge of how the story ultimately unfolds. The way seemingly minor details prove significant in later arcs, the manner in which character introductions contain subtle clues about their eventual importance, the careful placement of symbolic elements that gain meaning only after subsequent revelations. All of these techniques suggest a narrator working backward from known outcomes rather than forward into uncertainty. The cyclical nature of history that One Piece explores so thoroughly provides thematic support for Brook's role as narrator, his position allowing him to perceive patterns that remain invisible to those caught within the flow of immediate events. The parallels between Joy Boy's era and Roger's journey, the similarities between Roger's adventures and Luffy's quest, the way certain roles seem to be filled by different individuals across generations. these patterns would be most apparent to someone who has lived long enough to witness multiple iterations of the same fundamental story. Brooks' experience with loss provides him with unique qualifications for narrating a tale that, despite its themes of friendship and adventure, ultimately confronts the reality that all bonds are temporary, all crews eventually disperse, all dreams face the final limitation imposed by mortality itself. His previous experience losing the Rumbar Pirates taught him lessons about grief, memory, and the responsibility of survivors that prepare him for the greater loss that may await when his current family follows the same inevitable path toward death. The Rumbar Pirates' fate serves as both parallel and preview for what may eventually befall the Straw Hats. Their gradual reduction through disease, violence, and misfortune representing the natural entropy that affects all human endeavors, regardless of the strength, determination, or love that initially binds them together. Brooks' survival of that earlier tragedy, his 50 years of solitude aboard a ghost ship drifting through the Florian Triangle, demonstrates both his capacity to endure ultimate isolation and the psychological toll such endurance exacts on even the most resilient spirits. The music that serves as Brooks' primary contribution to his current crew takes on additional significance when viewed as preparation for his eventual role as their storyteller, his songs serving as emotional anchors that will help him remember not just the facts of their adventures, but the feelings that gave those facts meaning. The melodies he composes during their journey become more than entertainment. They transform into mnemonic devices that will preserve the essence of their relationships, long after the voices that sang along have been silenced forever. The logbooks that Nami maintains as their navigator provide Brooke with source material that extends back to the crew's earliest adventures, detailed records of their travels that include information from before his recruitment to their cause. These documents, combined with the stories shared during quiet moments aboard the Thousand Sunny, give him access to the complete narrative of their journey in ways that would allow him to recount events he did not personally witness with the same intimacy and detail as those he experienced firsthand. The parallel between Brooks' potential role and the established tradition of chroniclers preserving the stories of great figures throughout One Piece's history suggests that his survival serves a purpose larger than mere personal tragedy. Queen Lily's decision to scatter the poneglyphs, ensuring that Joy Boy's story would survive even if the ancient kingdom did not, demonstrates how the preservation of truth can transcend the destruction of those who originally embodied it. Oden's journal, maintained throughout his journey with the Roger Pirates and eventually inherited by Yamato, provides another example of how individual testimony can preserve collective memory across generational boundaries. The Revolutionary Army's efforts to document and spread information about world government atrocities, the scholars of Ohara's dedication to preserving forbidden knowledge even at the cost of their lives, the way certain truths persist despite official attempts at suppression. All of these examples establish precedent for the idea that some stories are too important to be allowed to die with those who lived them, that certain witnesses bear responsibility for ensuring that significant events are not lost to the natural forgetfulness that accompanies the passage of time. Brooks' unique perspective as someone who has experienced both death and resurrection provides him with insights into the nature of memory, legacy, and the persistence of identity beyond physical existence that would inform his approach to narrating the Straw Hat's story. His understanding of what survives death and what is lost, his appreciation for the difference between factual accuracy and emotional truth, his recognition that stories serve purposes beyond mere historical documentation. All of these factors would shape his telling in ways that honor both the events themselves and the people who gave them meaning. The melancholy that underlies much of Brooks' humor, his tendency to make jokes about his own mortality, while simultaneously displaying deep sensitivity to others' pain, reveals someone who has learned to cope with existential horror through the deliberate cultivation of joy and connection. This psychological adaptation would serve him well in his role as chronicler of a story that must balance celebration of extraordinary achievement with acknowledgement of inevitable loss. The technological capabilities that Brooke has developed during his time as a skeleton, his ability to project his soul beyond his physical form, his growing mastery of techniques that blur the line between life and death, suggest powers that may continue to evolve in ways that support his role as eternal witness. His soul's independence from his physical form might allow him to observe events from perspectives unavailable to ordinary individuals, to preserve memories with supernatural clarity, to maintain connection with the essence of his departed friends in ways that transcend normal human limitations. The Thousand Sunny herself becomes a character in this theoretical future narrative, the ship serving as Brooke's final companion and mobile shrine to the crew that once filled her decks with laughter and dreams. The modifications that Frankie built into her design, her ability to survive in conditions that would destroy lesser vessels, her symbolic significance as the gift that represented Kaya's faith in their impossible journey. All of these qualities make her the perfect vessel to carry Brooke's lonely vigil across seas, emptied of everyone he once loved. The possibility that Brooke's narration occurs not in deliberate storytelling sessions but in solitary remembrance, his voice carrying across empty oceans as he retraces their journey and relives their adventures through the power of memory alone, adds layers of tragedy to the theory that transform it from simple narrative technique into meditation on the nature of love, loss, and the prices we pay for the privilege of caring deeply about others whose mortality makes separation inevitable. The cyclical nature of the story that Brooke might tell, his potential return to Reverse Mountain and reunion with Laboon serving as both ending and beginning of an eternal cycle of memory and mourning, creates a structure that mirrors the broader patterns of history that One Piece explores so thoroughly. The whale who has waited 50 years for friends who will never return becomes audience for stories about friends who came later but followed the same path toward ultimate departure. The final image that this theory suggests, Brooke alone on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, perhaps pouring sake onto graves that mark the resting places of the greatest crew ever assembled, raising a toast to adventures that change the world while speaking their names into wind that carries his words to audiences who will never fully understand what they have lost, encapsulates the bittersweet nature of all human connection, the way love makes us vulnerable to loss, while simultaneously providing the only meaning capable of justifying the pain such vulnerability inevitably brings. The strength required to continue existing in such circumstances, to find purpose in preservation when all personal sources of joy have been exhausted, to choose memory over forgetfulness when remembering brings only pain. This strength represents perhaps the greatest form of courage displayed anywhere in the One Piece saga, the heroism of the survivor who refuses to allow important stories to die simply because their protagonists have moved beyond the reach of earthly celebration. As we contemplate the possibility that every adventure we witness, every bond we celebrate, every triumph we applaud, exists only in the memories of a skeleton musician drifting alone across seas that have claimed everyone else he ever loved, we confront the fundamental tragedy that underlies all human experience, the recognition that our connections with others, no matter how profound or transformative, exist within the context of mortality that makes permanent separation inevitable, that our greatest joys carry within them the seeds of our deepest sorrows, that the price of loving deeply is the guarantee of losing completely. In the crimson twilight of dreams betrayed and promises perverted, where the symbols of hope become instruments of despair and father figures reveal themselves as architects of destruction, there lurks perhaps the most devastating possibility that the One Piece world contains, that Shanks, the red-haired pirate who inspired a generation's greatest hero, may himself be orchestrating the ultimate sacrifice that will transform inspiration into consumption, mentorship into manipulation, and love into the cruelest form of betrayal imaginable. The theory that Shanks has spent decades grooming Luffy not for greatness but for harvest, cultivating the Nika powers within him, only to claim them through cannibalistic consumption at the moment of their greatest potential, represents a perversion of every sacred bond that makes life worth living. The foundation of this theory rests upon the suspicious timing of Shanks's renewed interest in claiming the One Piece, his sudden urgency coinciding precisely with the worldwide revelation of Luffy's Gear 5th transformation, and the confirmation that the boy he once mentored has awakened the legendary powers of Nika. For decades, Shanks remained content to maintain his position as one of the 4 emperors without making any serious attempt to reach the final island, despite possessing the strength, resources, and knowledge that would make such a journey entirely feasible for someone of his capabilities. This strategic patience becomes sinister when viewed through the lens of long-term planning designed to coincide with specific developments in Luffy's growth, as if Shanks has been waiting not for the right opportunity to pursue his own dreams, but for his protege to ripen into the perfect vessel for powers that cannot be obtained through conventional means. The Roger Pirates' declaration that they were too early takes on new meaning when interpreted not as timing related to global political conditions, but as reference to the absence of a suitable Nika user whose abilities could be harvested to activate whatever ancient weapon or technology awaits discovery at Laugh Tale. The straw hat that Shanks placed upon young Luffy's head transforms from symbol of inherited dreams into marking of intended prey, the physical token serving not as blessing, but as brand that identifies its wearer as property claimed for future consumption. The emotional weight attached to this simple piece of headwear, the way it has served as Luffy's most treasured possession throughout his entire journey, makes its potential role in his betrayal all the more devastating, the very symbol of their bond becoming the means by which that bond is revealed to have been illusion from its inception. Shanks's sacrifice of his left arm to save Luffy from the Lord of the Coast gains horrific new significance when viewed as investment rather than rescue, the deliberate creation of a debt that could never be repaid through ordinary means, while simultaneously demonstrating the lengths to which he was willing to go to preserve his chosen vessel. The physical sacrifice that seemed to prove his genuine care for the boy may have been calculated risk, designed to cement Luffy's loyalty and ensure that he would never question Shanks's motives or suspect the true purpose behind their relationship. The psychological manipulation embedded within this interpretation extends far beyond simple deception into realms of grooming that mirror the most disturbing patterns of predatory behavior, with Shanks assuming the role of idealized father figure whose approval becomes the organizing principle around which Luffy builds his entire identity. Every word of encouragement, every expression of pride, every moment of apparent affection serves the larger project of creating emotional dependency that makes resistance to ultimate betrayal psychologically impossible. The timing of Shanks's visits to Fushia Village, his careful cultivation of Luffy's dream to become Pirate King, his strategic absence during the boy's formative years, all of these choices align perfectly with a grooming strategy designed to create maximum emotional attachment while avoiding the kind of constant presence that might allow the target to develop genuine understanding of their manipulator's true character. The idealization that results from limited contact serves Shanks's purposes far better than the complex reality that would emerge from sustained interaction. The devil fruit that Luffy consumed during their time together takes on sinister implications when we consider that Shanks, as someone with connections to the Roger Pirates and their exploration of the world's deepest secrets, would have understood the true nature of the Gomu Gomu no Mi long before its consumption. The casual manner in which such a valuable and significant fruit was left within reach of a curious child suggests not carelessness, but deliberate planning, the orchestration of events designed to ensure that Luffy would gain access to powers essential for Shanks's ultimate plan. The revelation that this fruit was actually the Hito Hito no Mi model, Nika, transforms Shanks' apparent negligence into evidence of sophisticated manipulation designed to conceal the true significance of what was occurring. By allowing Luffy to believe he had consumed a relatively mundane rubber fruit, Shanks ensured that the boy would develop his abilities without understanding their true potential or the reasons why such powers might make him valuable to those with knowledge of ancient secrets. The government's desperate attempts to acquire this specific devil fruit, their willingness to sacrifice a CP9 agent and risk exposure of their operations in pursuit of what they believed to be merely the Gomu Gomu no Mi, suggests knowledge about its true nature that Shanks would have shared through his connections to the world's power structures. His successful theft of the fruit from a government transport represents not opportunistic piracy, but the execution of a plan designed to place these specific powers in the hands of a specific individual for purposes that required years of preparation to achieve. The parallels between Shanks's theoretical cannibalism and the established patterns displayed by Blackbeard and Big Mom create a trilogy of Emperor-level pirates whose power stems not from natural talent or training, but from the parallels consumption of others' abilities through methods that violate the most fundamental taboos governing civilized behavior. The suggestion that all three of the most powerful pirates in the world have achieved their positions through systematic cannibalism transforms the entire power structure of the pirate world into monument to the principle that ultimate strength require ultimate morale compromise, the specific focus on heart consumption as the mechanism for devil fruit power transfer gains support from various cultural and mythological traditions that identify the heart as the seat of courage, will, and spiritual essence, qualities that would need to be absorbed along with mere physical abilities to achieve complete transfer of devil fruit powers. The intimate nature of such consumption, the personal violation it represents, the psychological impact on both consumer and victim, all serve to distinguish this method from simple murder by transforming killing into a form of spiritual cannibalism that destroys not just life, but identity itself. The master plan that emerges from this interpretation casts Shanks as perhaps the most sophisticated manipulator in the entire One Piece world, someone whose understanding of psychology, history, and supernatural forces allows him to orchestrate events across decades while maintaining the trust and affection of his intended victim. The complexity required for such manipulation speaks to intelligence and patience that exceed anything displayed by other antagonists, their relatively straightforward approaches to villainy paling in comparison to the elegant horror of corruption disguised as mentorship. The question of Shanks's ultimate motivation, whether he serves the world government, pursues some personal vision of justice, or seeks to fulfill Roger's final wishes through methods that Roger himself would have found abhorrent, adds layers of moral complexity that transform him from simple villain into tragic figure whose noble goals have been corrupted by the belief that any means are justified by sufficiently important ends. The possibility that he genuinely loves Luffy while simultaneously planning to consume him represents the kind of psychological contradiction that makes the most disturbing antagonists compelling rather than merely repulsive. The ancient technology that responds to Nika's drums of liberation, demonstrated through the Iron Giant's awakening in response to both Luffy's and Bonnie's Gear 5th transformations, suggests that these powers serve as activation keys for weapons or systems whose operation requires the specific spiritual frequency generated by the liberation deity's manifestation. If the One Piece itself represents some form of ancient technology designed to overthrow the world government or reshape the world's power structure, then control of Nika's abilities becomes not luxury, but necessity for anyone seeking to claim Joy Boy's inheritance. The Revolutionary Army's goals and methods gain new significance when viewed alongside the possibility that Shanks serves as their secret weapon. His infiltration of the pirate world and cultivation of Nika's powers, representing the final stage of Dragon's plan to overthrow the established order. The father-son relationship between Dragon and Luffy becomes even more tragic if both father figures are ultimately working toward the same goal through methods that require the sacrifice of the boy they claim to love, their revolutionary ideals corrupted by the same utilitarian calculus that has always justified the powerful's consumption of the powerless. The crew that Shanks has assembled around himself takes on sinister overtones when viewed as participants in or witnesses to his cannibalistic practices, their loyalty tested not through conventional pirate adventures, but through complicity in acts that would horrify even hardened criminals. The casual manner in which they discuss their captain's plans, their apparent comfort with morally ambiguous activities, their willingness to follow orders without questioning their ultimate purpose. All of these characteristics become evidence of systematic desensitization to atrocity rather than simple pirate pragmatism. The final confrontation that this theory suggests, with Shanks revealing his true intentions at the moment when Luffy has achieved his greatest triumph and stands on the verge of claiming the One Piece, represents betrayal so complete that it would destroy not just Luffy, but everything he represents about the power of dreams, friendship, and the possibility of positive change in a corrupt world. The revelation that the man who inspired his journey has been planning its ultimate perversion from the beginning would constitute trauma sufficient to break even someone with Luffy's extraordinary resilience. The cannibalistic consumption that would follow such revelation, Shanks literally devouring Luffy's heart to claim the Nika powers for himself, represents the ultimate expression of every theme that One Piece has explored, about the relationship between dreams and reality, power and responsibility, love and possession. The act itself would serve as perfect metaphor for how the older generation's failures and compromises ultimately consume the younger generation's hope and potential, transforming inspiration into exploitation through the simple expedient of refusing to allow others to surpass their achievements. The broader implications of accepting this theory extend beyond individual relationships to encompass questions about the nature of mentorship, guidance, and the responsibility that powerful individuals bear toward those who look to them for direction and support. The possibility that even the most seemingly benevolent authority figures might harbor predatory intentions hidden beneath facades of care and protection speaks to anxieties that extend far beyond fictional piracy into the real world, dynamics that shape how trust develops between those with power and those without it. The psychological impact on readers and viewers of discovering that Shanks, one of the series' most beloved characters, and the figure who represents the romantic ideal of piracy at its finest, has actually been orchestrating the ultimate corruption of everything he appears to stand for, would mirror the trauma experienced by Luffy himself, forcing audiences to confront the possibility that their own faith in positive role models and inspirational figures might be misplaced. As we contemplate the full horror of what Shanks's betrayal would represent, not just the death of a protagonist, but the revelation that his entire journey has been orchestrated by someone whose love was actually hunger, whose guidance was actually grooming, whose inspiration was actually the patient cultivation of prey, we confront perhaps the darkest possibility embedded within human relationships, that those who claim to care for us might actually view us as resources to be consumed when the time is right, that the bonds we treasure most might exist primarily to serve purposes we cannot imagine, and would not accept if we understood them fully. In the rarefied atmosphere of Marieshwar, where marble corridors echo with the screams of the damned and golden chambers conceal horrors that would make demons weep, there exists a class of beings so thoroughly corrupted by absolute power that they have transcended ordinary human evil to become something approaching living embodiments of systematic cruelty. The celestial dragons, who style themselves as gods deserving of worship from lesser mortals, have constructed a civilization built upon foundations of suffering so profound that their very existence represents an indictment of every principle that claims to govern civilized society. The breeding programs that operate within the hidden depths of the Holy Land represent perhaps the most systematic violation of human dignity ever conceived. Industrial-scale reproduction designed to produce specific types of human beings for purposes that reduce children to manufactured goods before they draw their first breath. These programs operate according to principles that treat genetic heritage not as natural inheritance, but as commodity to be refined, combined, and optimized according to market demands that place value on characteristics ranging from physical beauty to psychological compliance. The women who serve as involuntary participants in these breeding programs exist in states of captivity so complete that they lose all connection to their original identities, their lives reduced to cycles of pregnancy, birth, and recovery designed to maximize reproductive output while minimizing operational costs. Their children are claimed by the state before maternal bonds can form, preventing emotional attachments that might complicate future transactions or create psychological obstacles to their eventual sale or deployment. The genetic manipulation that shapes these breeding programs extends beyond simple selective reproduction to encompass more sophisticated forms of human modification, with certain bloodlines being maintained specifically for their compatibility with experimental procedures that would prove fatal to ordinary human subjects. The children born from these controlled unions serve as test subjects for enhancement techniques, psychological conditioning methods, and surgical modifications that push the boundaries of what human bodies can endure while retaining basic functionality. The slave markets that flourish under celestial dragon patronage represent not mere commerce but systematic dehumanization, designed to transform thinking, feeling human beings into objects whose value derives entirely from their utility to purchasers, whose appetites encompass every form of exploitation that human imagination has ever conceived. The auctions where human beings are sold like livestock operate according to pricing structures that assign monetary value to characteristics ranging from age and physical condition to educational background and ethnic heritage. The children who enter these markets carry no memory of lives before captivity. Their earliest experiences shaped by training designed to eliminate any sense of personal worth, individual agency, or hope for circumstances different from those they are taught to accept as natural and inevitable. Their psychological conditioning begins before they can speak and continues throughout their development, creating personalities that cannot conceive of existence outside the parameters of absolute servitude to masters whose whims become the only law they will ever know. The sexual exploitation that permeates every level of celestial dragon society operates according to principles that view consent as meaningless concept when applied to interactions between gods and mortals, their belief in their own divine nature serving as justification for imposing their desires upon others regardless of the physical or psychological damage such imposition might cause. The normalization of sexual violence within their culture creates environments where rape becomes not crime but privilege, where resistance becomes not justified response but incomprehensible rebellion against natural order. The marriage arrangements that bind celestial dragon women to lives of reproductive servitude demonstrate how even those born into the highest levels of privilege can become victims of the same system that grants their families power over others. These women, raised from birth to understand that their primary value lies in their ability to produce heirs carrying pure bloodlines, face lives structured around pregnancies, childbirths, and child-rearing duties that allow no room for personal desires, individual agency, or authentic relationship formation. The children who result from these arranged unions inherit not just wealth and status, but psychological damage that shapes their understanding of human relationships, power dynamics, and moral responsibility in ways that ensure the continuation of cycles of abuse across generational boundaries. Their earliest experiences teach them that other people exist primarily to serve their needs, that violence is appropriate response to inconvenience, that empathy represents weakness rather than strength. The educational systems that shape young celestial dragons operate according to curricula designed to reinforce their sense of inherent superiority while preventing exposure to ideas, experiences, or relationships that might develop their capacity for recognizing the humanity of those they are taught to view as property. Their tutors, carefully selected for their willingness to perpetuate existing power structures, provide instruction that emphasizes technical skills and cultural knowledge while systematically suppressing moral development or critical thinking abilities. The isolation that characterizes celestial dragon childhood serves multiple purposes within their educational framework, preventing exposure to alternative value systems while creating psychological dependency on approval from authority figures whose love becomes conditional upon compliance with behavioral expectations that prioritize family honor over individual conscience. The children learn early that questioning established practices results in punishment, while enthusiastic participation in traditional activities brings rewards that reinforce their commitment to perpetuating the system that grants them privilege. The religious framework that celestial dragons use to justify their treatment of other human beings represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of moral corruption ever developed, transforming genuine spiritual concepts into tools for rationalizing behavior that violates every principle that authentic religion claims to uphold. Their understanding of divine authority serves not to humble them before higher powers, but to elevate them above moral constraints that they believe apply only to lesser beings unworthy of divine consideration. The ceremonies and rituals that punctuate celestial dragon social calendars often incorporate elements that would be recognized as torture if applied to members of their own class. Their casual infliction of suffering upon others, serving as entertainment, spiritual practice, and social bonding activity that reinforces group identity through shared participation in acts that mark clear boundaries between themselves and their victims. These events create collective complicity that makes individual resistance to systematic cruelty psychologically difficult, even for those who might otherwise develop moral qualms about their participation. The medical experiments conducted upon slave populations in the name of advancing scientific knowledge represent the intersection of celestial dragon cruelty with intellectual curiosity. Their access to unlimited human test subjects, enabling research programs that push the boundaries of surgical technique, pharmaceutical development, and psychological manipulation, without regard for consent, suffering, or long-term consequences for their unwilling participants. The children who serve as subjects in these experimental programs face procedures designed to test the limits of human endurance, the effectiveness of various control methods, and the possibility of enhancement techniques that might create more valuable or useful servants. Their experiences provide data that informs breeding programs, training methodologies, and selection criteria used throughout the Celestial Dragon slave trade network. The psychological warfare employed against slave populations extends beyond physical violence to encompass more subtle forms of control that attack identity, hope, and social connection in ways designed to prevent collective resistance while maintaining individual productivity. The systematic destruction of family bonds, cultural traditions, and personal histories creates populations that lack the psychological resources necessary for organized rebellion or sustained resistance to their treatment. The indoctrination programs that accompany this psychological warfare teach slaves to view their treatment as deserved, their masters as benevolent, and their circumstances as natural rather than imposed. The most successful of these programs create victims who genuinely believe in the righteousness of their oppression, who work enthusiastically to serve those who exploit them, who report on fellow slaves who express dissatisfaction with their circumstances. The economic systems that support Celestial Dragon Society operate according to principles that extract maximum value from human suffering, while distributing the benefits exclusively among those who contribute nothing productive to the processes that generate wealth. The slaves whose labor creates prosperity for their masters receive nothing beyond subsistence necessary to maintain their capacity for continued work, their entire life output serving to fund luxury consumption that exists primarily to demonstrate the power differential between exploiters and exploited. The environmental consequences of Celestial Dragon lifestyle choices reflect their complete disregard for any considerations beyond immediate gratification, their consumption patterns destroying natural resources, poisoning ecosystems, and depleting renewable assets in ways that prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term sustainability. The ecological damage they cause falls disproportionately upon populations that lack the resources to protect themselves or relocate to areas less affected by contamination. The international relations that Celestial Dragons maintain with governments throughout the world operate according to principles that treat national sovereignty, cultural autonomy, and popular democracy as obstacles to be overcome rather than values to be respected. Their influence over world government policy ensures that international law serves their interests while constraining the ability of weaker nations to protect their citizens from exploitation by more powerful neighbors. The tribute systems that these international relationships create force entire populations to subsidize Celestial Dragon luxury through tax policies, trade agreements, and resource extraction arrangements that transfer wealth from productive communities to parasitic elites who contribute nothing positive to global prosperity or human development. The children born into communities affected by these arrangements inherit debt obligations, environmental damage, and political constraints that limit their opportunities, while ensuring continued benefit flows to their oppressors. The propaganda networks that maintain Celestial Dragon legitimacy operate through media systems, educational institutions, and cultural organizations that present their rule as natural, beneficial, and divinely ordained rather than artificial, destructive, and morally unjustifiable. These networks shape public understanding of history, current events, and possible futures in ways that make alternatives to the existing system seem impossible or undesirable. The resistance movements that occasionally emerge to challenge Celestial Dragon authority face opponents whose resources, connections, and willingness to employ unlimited violence make sustained opposition extremely difficult to maintain. The systematic destruction of leadership, the infiltration of organizations, and the application of collective punishment against sympathetic populations create environments where even thinking about resistance becomes dangerous for individuals and communities that lack sufficient power to protect themselves from retaliation. As we contemplate the full scope of Celestial Dragon cruelty, the breeding programs that treat human reproduction as industrial process, the slave markets that reduce children to commodities, the sexual exploitation that normalizes rape as privilege, the experimental programs that use unwilling subjects to advance scientific knowledge, the psychological warfare that destroys identity and hope, the economic systems that extract maximum value from human suffering. We confront evidence of evil so systematic and thorough that it challenges our capacity to comprehend how such institutions could develop, persist, and maintain legitimacy among populations that benefit from their operation. The greatest horror lies not in any single atrocity, but in the comprehensive nature of the system they have created, the way every aspect of their society operates according to principles that maximize suffering while distributing benefits exclusively to those least deserving of comfort or power. Their existence serves as reminder that human beings, when freed from moral constraints and granted unlimited authority over others, can create hells more terrible than any fictional depiction of damnation ever conceived. In the sterile laboratories where science serves power rather than humanity, where brilliant minds apply their talents to projects that transform children into weapons and reduce human consciousness to programmable code, there exists a form of evil so sophisticated that it disguises itself as progress, while perpetrating atrocities that make conventional warfare seem humane by comparison. The world government's systematic conversion of human beings into cyborg soldiers represents not merely military advancement, but the deliberate erasure of everything that makes existence meaningful. The transformation of souls into software and dreams, into data that can be manipulated according to the strategic requirements of those who view people as resources to be optimized rather than individuals deserving of dignity and choice. At the center of this technological nightmare stands Dr. Vegapunk, a man whose intellectual capabilities rival those of the greatest minds in human history, but whose moral compass has been so thoroughly corrupted by proximity to power that he has become complicit in projects that violate every principle of medical ethics, scientific responsibility, and basic human decency. His laboratories serve as monuments to the proposition that knowledge without conscience represents not enlightenment but damnation, that the pursuit of understanding divorced from consideration of consequences inevitably leads to innovations that diminish rather than enhance the human condition. The Seraphim Project represents perhaps the most horrifying expression of Vegapunk's willingness to sacrifice moral principle on the altar of scientific achievement, the creation of child soldiers through cloning technologies that combine the genetic material of legendary pirates with artificial modifications designed to eliminate inconvenient traits like conscience, empathy, and individual will. These artificial beings possess the physical capabilities of some of history's most powerful warriors, while lacking the psychological complexity that made their originals capable of growth, change, and genuine relationship formation. The children who serve as raw material for these experiments face procedures that begin before they achieve consciousness. Their developing brains subjected to modifications designed to prevent the formation of memories, emotions, or desires that might interfere with their programmed purposes. The surgeries that install mechanical components throughout their bodies occur without anesthesia, not due to medical necessity, but because the capacity to experience pain is viewed as weakness that must be eliminated along with every other aspect of normal human experience. The psychological conditioning that accompanies physical modification operates according to principles borrowed from the most effective forms of torture and brainwashing, techniques refined through experimentation on countless unwilling subjects whose suffering provides data used to optimize the process of personality, destruction, and replacement. The children who undergo this conditioning emerge as perfect soldiers, in the sense that they have been stripped of everything that might cause them to question orders, resist authority, or prioritize their own survival over mission completion. The memory erasure technologies that Vegapunk has perfected allow for surgical precision in the removal of specific experiences, relationships, and emotional attachments that might create psychological obstacles to complete obedience. The victims of these procedures lose not just their past, but their capacity to form new memories that might interfere with their programming, their consciousness reduced to permanent present tense, where only immediate instructions carry meaning or significance. Bartholomew Kuma's transformation from Revolutionary Army commander to world government weapon exemplifies the personal tragedy that underlies every technological triumph achieved through Vegapunk's research, the systematic destruction of a man whose dedication to justice and protection of the innocent made him precisely the type of individual whose conversion would send the strongest possible message about the futility of resistance to established authority. The process that transformed Kuma from conscious being into programmable machine required not just physical modification, but the complete elimination of his personality, memories, and emotional connections to other people. The man who had once risked everything to protect children from the horrors of slavery was systematically reprogrammed to serve those same forces he had spent his life fighting, his body becoming instrument of oppression wielded by the very system he had sought to overthrow. The irony embedded within Kuma's fate extends beyond personal tragedy to encompass broader questions about the relationship between technology and human agency, the ways that tools designed to enhance human capability can be perverted to eliminate human choice. The Nikyu no Mi powers that had once allowed him to remove pain and suffering from those he sought to help were transformed into weapons that inflicted agony upon anyone designated as enemy by programmers who viewed compassion as doze, malfunction to be corrected, rather than virtue to be preserved. The pacifista program that emerged from Kuma's conversion represents the industrialization of human destruction, mass production techniques applied to the creation of soldiers whose mechanical nature eliminates concerns about morale, loyalty, or moral qualms that complicate the deployment of conventional forces. These artificial beings can be ordered to commit any atrocity without experiencing the psychological consequences that might affect their future performance or create liabilities for their commanders. The children who serve as templates for pacifista production are selected not randomly, but according to criteria that prioritize psychological vulnerability, social isolation, and lack of powerful protectors who might interfere with experimental procedures. Orphans, refugees, and members of marginalized communities provide ideal subjects because their disappearance creates minimal disruption, while their suffering generates no political consequences for those responsible for their exploitation. The surgical procedures that convert these children into cyborg weapons involve systematic replacement of organic systems with mechanical alternatives that offer superior performance characteristics while eliminating the unpredictability associated with biological functions. The heart, brain, and nervous system modifications that these procedures require result in beings that retain human appearance while possessing none of the qualities that make humanity worth preserving or protecting. The training programs designed for cyborg soldiers operate according to principles that treat independent thought as error to be corrected rather than capacity to be developed. Their education focusing exclusively on tactical knowledge, weapon proficiency, and obedience conditioning, while systematically suppressing curiosity, creativity, or moral reasoning that might interfere with mission effectiveness. The field testing that accompanies cyborg soldier development involves deployment in scenarios specifically designed to evaluate their willingness to commit acts that would traumatize normal human beings. Their performance measured not just by tactical success, but by their psychological reaction to orders that violate fundamental moral principles. Those who display reluctance, hesitation, or emotional distress undergo additional conditioning until such responses are completely eliminated. Judge Vinsmoke's Germa 66 experiments on his own children represent the logical extension of cyborg soldier development into family structures, the transformation of parental authority into scientific methodology that treats offspring as research subjects rather than individuals deserving of love, protection, and guidance. His willingness to subject his sons to genetic modifications that eliminate their capacity for emotional experience demonstrates how thoroughly the pursuit of military effectiveness can corrupt even the most fundamental human relationships. The emotional suppression technologies that Judge employs create children who possess exceptional physical capabilities while lacking empathy, compassion, or any other psychological characteristics that might interfere with their function as weapons. The success of these modifications is measured not by their happiness, fulfillment, or personal growth, but by their efficiency in combat situations and their complete indifference to the suffering they inflict upon others. Sanji's escape from these modifications becomes even more significant when viewed as a rare example of human nature successfully resisting technological attempts at personality control. His retention of emotional capacity, serving as proof that some aspects of consciousness cannot be eliminated through purely mechanical means. His ability to love, to care for others, to experience joy in simple pleasures like cooking, represents triumph of authentic humanity over artificial optimization that makes him valuable beyond any strategic consideration. The psychological impact on researchers who participate in cyborg soldier development reveals the broader human cost of projects that require systematic suppression of normal moral reactions to the suffering of others. The scientists and technicians who perform these procedures must undergo their own forms of conditioning, designed to eliminate empathy, guilt, or other emotional responses that might interfere with their work effectiveness. The security measures that protect cyborg soldier research facilities operate according to principles that treat information about these programs as more valuable than the lives of those who might seek to expose their existence. The researchers, guards, and administrators who work within these facilities face constant surveillance designed to prevent leaks, defections, or other forms of betrayal that might compromise operational security or create public relations problems for sponsoring organizations. The cover stories that conceal cyborg soldier programs from public knowledge rely on deliberate misdirection that presents technological advancement as humanitarian progress while concealing the human cost required to achieve such development. The propaganda that surrounds figures like Vegapunk emphasizes his contributions to beneficial applications, while systematically omitting reference to military projects that represent the primary focus of his research efforts. The international implications of cyborg soldier technology extend beyond immediate military applications to encompass broader questions about the future of human conflict, the role of individual agency in warfare, and the possibility that technological advancement might eliminate human choice from decisions about life and death. The proliferation of such technologies creates arms races that force other nations to choose between developing their own cyborg programs or accepting strategic disadvantage that might prove fatal in future conflicts. The resistance movements that seek to expose or prevent cyborg soldier development face opponents whose resources, technological capabilities, and willingness to employ unlimited violence make sustained opposition extremely difficult to maintain. The systematic elimination of witnesses, the infiltration of humanitarian organizations, and the application of advanced surveillance techniques create environments where even thinking about resistance becomes dangerous for individuals who lack sufficient power to protect themselves from retaliation. The children who survive cyborg soldier programs carry psychological scars that extend far beyond physical modifications. Their experiences with systematic dehumanization, creating trauma patterns that affect not just their own capacity for normal relationship formation, but their ability to trust, love, or find meaning in existence that has been reduced to function rather than experience. The philosophical questions raised by cyborg soldier development challenge fundamental assumptions about human nature, individual identity, and the relationship between consciousness and physical form. The systematic conversion of thinking, feeling beings into programmable weapons forces confrontation with possibilities about technological modification of human experience that may prove more disturbing than any purely fictional horror ever conceived. As we contemplate the full implications of the world government's cyborg soldier programs, the systematic conversion of children into weapons, the elimination of consciousness through technological modification, the transformation of protective figures like Kuma into instruments of oppression, the industrial production of beings that retain human form while possessing none of humanity's redeeming qualities, we confront evidence of evil that transcends conventional categories of wrongdoing to encompass fundamental violations of everything that makes existence meaningful or worthwhile. The greatest horror lies not in any single procedure, but in the comprehensive nature of systems designed to eliminate human agency, individual choice, and authentic experience from beings who were once capable of love, growth, and genuine connection to others. These programs represent not progress but regression, not advancement but degradation of human potential that reduces consciousness to programming and souls to software that can be modified according to strategic requirements of those who view people as resources rather than individuals, deserving of dignity, respect, and the opportunity to determine their own destinies. In the twisted genealogies of guilt that stretch across generations like chains forged from blood and regret, where the sins of fathers become the defining characteristics of their children's existence, and the weight of inherited shame crushes dreams before they can take root, there exists perhaps the most pervasive form of injustice that the one-piece world contains: the systematic punishment of innocents for crimes they did not commit, choices they did not make, and legacies they never chose to inherit. The children who bear the burden of their parents' reputations face lives constrained by expectations, haunted by histories, and shaped by the unforgiving principle that bloodline determines destiny more powerfully than individual character or personal choice ever could. Portgas D. Ace stands as the most tragic embodiment of this inherited burden. his entire existence defined not by his own actions, achievements, or aspirations, but by the simple biological fact of his parentage to Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King, whose execution was meant to end an era, but instead condemned his unborn son to a lifetime of running from shadows cast by deeds he could never understand or influence. The systematic hunt for Roger's bloodline that followed his death transformed pregnancy from miracle into death sentence, forcing countless innocent women to pay with their lives for the crime of carrying children whose only fault was genetic connection to someone the world government had already destroyed. The 20 months that Portgas D. Rouge carried Ace in her womb represent one of the most heartbreaking displays of maternal sacrifice in human history. Her deliberate extension of pregnancy through sheer force of will, serving as final act of defiance against a system that would murder infants for the crime of existing. Her death immediately following his birth transformed Ace's first breath into his mother's last, ensuring that his entry into the world was marked not by celebration but by loss, not by joy but by the knowledge that his very existence had cost the life of the woman who loved him enough to die protecting him. The psychological impact of learning that your birth killed your mother creates trauma patterns that extend far beyond simple grief into realms of existential guilt that poison every aspect of identity, formation, and self-worth. Development. Ace's lifelong struggle with the question of whether he deserved to exist stemmed not from abstract philosophical speculation, but from concrete awareness that his survival had required the ultimate sacrifice from someone whose only crime was loving him enough to ensure his safety at the cost of her own life. The foster care arrangement that placed infant Ace with Dadan and eventually brought him into contact with Luffy represented attempt to provide normal childhood experiences for someone whose parentage made normalcy impossible. Yet even within this protective environment, the weight of his inherited identity continued to shape his understanding of himself and his place in the world. The knowledge that his very existence was considered crime against humanity by the most powerful organization in the world created psychological burden that no amount of love or acceptance from surrogate family could completely alleviate. The relationship dynamics that developed between Ace, Luffy, and Sabo revealed how inherited trauma affects not just the direct victim but everyone who comes into contact with them. The constant undercurrent of self-doubt and inherited guilt that defined Ace's personality, creating obstacles to genuine intimacy, even with those who loved him unconditionally. His desperate need to prove his worth, his willingness to sacrifice himself for others, his inability to accept that he might be deserving of the affection shown to him. All of these characteristics stemmed from fundamental uncertainty about whether someone born from such controversial circumstances had any right to happiness or love. The irony embedded within Ace's fate lies in his transformation into exactly the type of pirate that the world government's persecution was designed to prevent. His inherited guilt and desperate need for validation driving him toward increasingly dangerous pursuits that ultimately brought him into contact with the very forces that had been hunting him since before his birth. The execution that claimed his life represented not just punishment for his own choices, but completion of a vendetta that had pursued him across decades, the final settlement of accounts that began with his father's crimes and ended with his own blood. Vinsmoke Sanji's experience with inherited expectations reveals different but equally devastating patterns of family-based trauma. His father's systematic attempt to eliminate his emotional capacity, representing the logical extreme of parental control, exercised in service of military efficiency rather than individual development. Judge Vinsmoke's treatment of his children as experimental subjects rather than human beings, deserving of love and protection, demonstrates how family structures can become instruments of dehumanization when parental authority serves ideology rather than nurturing. The genetic modifications that Judge imposed upon most of his children eliminated their capacity for empathy, compassion, and emotional connection, creating beings who possessed exceptional physical capabilities, while lacking the psychological qualities that make strength worth having or power worth wielding. Sanji's escape from these modifications, through what his father considered genetic failure, actually represented triumph of authentic humanity over artificial optimization, his retention of emotional capacity, marking him a successful human being rather than defective weapon. The systematic abuse that Sanji endured at the hands of his siblings, encouraged by their father as method of testing his resilience and eliminating weakness, created trauma patterns that extended far beyond physical pain into realms of psychological damage that affected his understanding of family relationships, personal worth, and the meaning of strength itself. The isolation he experienced within his own family structure, surrounded by people who shared his genetic heritage while lacking capacity for genuine relationship formation, taught him that blood connections mean nothing without emotional bonds to give them significance. The escape that eventually freed Sanji from his family's toxic environment came at enormous psychological cost. His departure, requiring him to abandon not just abusive relatives, but any hope of ever earning their approval or acceptance. The knowledge that his own father considered him failure, that his siblings viewed him as weakling, deserving only contempt, that his genetic modifications had been deemed unsuccessful by the very person responsible for his existence. All of these factors created foundations of self-doubt that persisted long after he found genuine family among the Peicaichan, Strafhat, Pirates. Don Quixote Doflamingo's corruption represents perhaps the most complex example of inherited trauma. His childhood experiences with the systematic destruction of his family's privileged position, creating psychological damage that manifested as complete moral inversion, transforming someone who might have developed into protector of the innocent, into predator whose greatest joy came from inflicting suffering upon those too weak to resist. The fall from celestial dragon status to ordinary mortality exposed him to treatment he had never experienced while eliminating the psychological frameworks that had previously provided meaning and structure to his existence. The murder of his father by desperate citizens seeking to claim the bounty placed upon former celestial dragons created trauma that went beyond simple loss of parent to encompass betrayal by the very people his father had tried to help, through renunciation of divine privilege. The lesson that Doflamingo drew from these experiences was that mercy represents weakness, that idealism leads to destruction, that power must be maintained through fear rather than earned through service or protected through justice. The psychological coping mechanisms that Doflamingo developed in response to childhood trauma involved complete embrace of the worst aspects of celestial dragon philosophy, while rejecting any elements that might be considered noble or redemptive. His treatment of subordinates, his approach to governance, his casual infliction of suffering upon entire populations, all of these behaviors represented deliberate choice to become monster rather than victim, to inflict trauma rather than process it in healthy ways. Nico Robin's childhood demonstrates how inherited guilt can be imposed upon individuals through association with ideas rather than just bloodline. Her connection to Ohara's forbidden research, making her target for systematic persecution, despite her complete innocence regarding the decisions that led to her island's destruction. The world government's determination to eliminate anyone capable of reading poneglyphs transformed her from promising young scholar into global fugitive before she reached adolescence, her intellectual capabilities becoming curse rather than gift. The isolation that defined Robin's early life, her inability to form lasting relationships due to constant need to hide her identity and abilities, her experience of watching everyone who showed her kindness eventually pay consequences for their association with her. All of these factors created psychological patterns that made genuine trust and emotional intimacy extremely difficult to achieve, even after finding acceptance among people who valued rather than feared her unique abilities. The systematic destruction of everyone who had ever cared for Robin during her years as fugitive taught her that love was liability, that attachment led to loss, that the safest approach to human relationships involved maintaining emotional distance that prevented others from being hurt by their association with her. The walls she built around her heart served as protection, not just for herself, but for anyone who might be tempted to offer her kindness in a world where such kindness could prove fatal to those who displayed it. The pattern that emerges from these examples reveals how inherited trauma operates according to principles that punish children for circumstances beyond their control, while creating psychological conditions that make healthy development extremely difficult to achieve. The victims of such trauma face impossible choices between accepting identities imposed upon them by others or rejecting those identities at enormous personal cost. Their struggles complicated by societies that prefer simple narratives about good and evil to complex realities about how trauma shapes personality development. The few individuals who manage to break free from cycles of inherited trauma typically do so through encounters with people who offer unconditional acceptance despite knowledge of their backgrounds, relationships that provide alternative models for understanding identity, worth, and possibility. Luffy's treatment of his crew members reveals the healing power of acceptance that judges people based on present choices rather than past circumstances, creating environments where inherited guilt can be transformed into motivation for positive change. The broader implications of inherited trauma extend beyond individual psychology to encompass questions about justice, responsibility, and the relationship between past and present in shaping social policy and legal frameworks. The systematic punishment of children for their parents' crimes represents violation of fundamental principles that supposedly govern civilized society, yet such practices persist because they serve political purposes that those in power find more important than individual justice or human dignity. The cycles of violence that result from inherited trauma create self-perpetuating systems where each generation's suffering becomes justification for inflicting similar suffering upon the next, their pain transformed into weapon used against others, rather than motivation for preventing similar experiences. Breaking these cycles requires conscious choice to absorb pain rather than pass it forward, to seek healing rather than revenge, to build rather than destroy. The healing that becomes possible when inherited trauma is acknowledged rather than denied, when victims receive support rather than condemnation, when societies choose justice over vengeance, demonstrates that even the most profound damage can be addressed through sustained effort and genuine commitment to human dignity. The transformation of characters like Ace, Sanji, and Robin from isolated victims into beloved family members proves that inherited trauma need not define entire lives if conditions can be created that support rather than compound existing damage. As we contemplate the full scope of inherited trauma within the One Piece world, the systematic hunting of pregnant women after Roger's execution, the genetic modifications imposed upon Sanji and his siblings, the psychological corruption that transformed Doflamingo from victim into victimizer, the global persecution that defined Robin's childhood, we confront evidence of how profoundly family relationships can be corrupted by forces that prioritize abstract principles over individual human worth, how completely social systems can fail those who most need protection and support. The greatest tragedy lies not in any single case of inherited trauma, but in the systematic nature of processes that ensure such trauma continues across generations, creating cycles of suffering that serve the interests of those who benefit from division, hatred, and fear, while destroying the lives of innocents whose only crime was being born into circumstances they could neither choose nor change. In the shadow realms, where death becomes not ending but transformation, where the natural order of existence bends beneath the weight of powers that mock mortality itself, there lies perhaps the most seductive and terrible curse that the devil fruit system has ever produced: the promise of eternal life, purchased at prices so devastating that they transform salvation into damnation, hope into aurora, and the gift of infinite time into punishment that exceeds any torture that finite existence could devise. The Opope no Mi's immortality surgery represents not divine blessing, but cosmic joke, offering escape from death's embrace only to those willing to sacrifice everything that makes life worth living in the first place. The mechanics of this ultimate operation reveal the cruel mathematics that govern supernatural power in the One Piece world, the requirement that immortality can only be granted through the willing death of the surgeon who performs the procedure, ensuring that eternal life becomes not gift freely given, but currency purchased with another's complete existence. The devil fruit user who possesses the knowledge and ability to grant immortality must surrender their own life force to fuel the transformation. Their consciousness, memories, and future possibilities consumed in the process of creating something that transcends natural law through violation of natural justice. Trafalgar Day, Waterlaw's relationship with this terrible power adds layers of personal tragedy to what might otherwise be abstract speculation about supernatural abilities, his entire existence shaped by knowledge that he possesses the capability to grant the ultimate gift, while knowing that doing so would require the ultimate sacrifice. The weight of carrying such power, of being constantly aware that he could solve the mortality problem for someone he loves only by ensuring that he would never be present to witness their eternal happiness, creates psychological burden that few minds could bear without breaking under the strain. The irony embedded within Law's situation becomes even more cruel when we consider that his own life was saved through sacrifice remarkably similar to what the immortality surgery would require. Corazon's willingness to die, protecting him, establishing patterns of love, expressed through ultimate loss that echo throughout his understanding of what relationships cost and what prices love might demand. The man who taught him that some things are worth dying for now possesses power that asks whether some things are worth killing for, even when the killing involves the willing surrender of one's own existence. The psychological profile required for someone to actually perform the immortality surgery reveals depths of altruism so profound that they border on pathological, the willingness to erase oneself completely from existence for another's benefit representing form of love so pure that it transcends normal human emotional categories to become something approaching divine sacrifice. Yet, the very purity of such motivation raises disturbing questions about whether anyone capable of such selflessness deserves to die, whether the world becomes poorer rather than richer when such individuals choose to transform their goodness into another's eternity. The recipients of immortality surgery face their own unique form of psychological torment, the knowledge that their eternal existence was purchased with someone else's complete annihilation, creating guilt patterns that would persist across centuries or millennia without possibility of resolution through death or forgetfulness. Every moment of their infinite future would carry within it reminder of the sacrifice that made such future possible, every joy tainted by awareness of the price paid, every achievement diminished by recognition that someone else should have been present to witness or share in its satisfaction. Im's potential immortality, suggested by their apparent rule spanning 8 centuries while maintaining physical form unchanged by time's passage, provides glimpse into what such eternal existence might actually entail when extended across historical timescales that exceed normal human comprehension. The isolation that would result from watching entire civilizations rise and fall while remaining essentially unchanged. The accumulation of memories spanning periods longer than most cultures survive. The gradual erosion of emotional connection to beings whose lifespans represent mere moments in the context of infinite existence. All of these factors would create psychological conditions that transform immortality from gift into punishment. The political implications of immortal rule extend beyond simple tyranny to encompass forms of oppression that become more sophisticated and comprehensive with each passing century. The accumulation of experience, knowledge, and resources, allowing immortal rulers to develop control systems that mortal tyrants could never achieve due to limitations of single lifetime learning curves. An immortal despot would possess centuries to study human nature, to perfect manipulation techniques, to eliminate opposition through methods refined across generations of practice. The moral corruption that might result from immortal existence stems not from inherent evil but from gradual desensitization to suffering that becomes inevitable when one possesses infinite time to witness infinite examples of human pain, loss, and death. The emotional mechanisms that allow mortals to maintain empathy and compassion depend partly on shared vulnerability to death, shared recognition that life is precious because it is limited. Remove that shared condition, and the psychological foundations for caring about others' welfare begin to erode through simple exposure to endless examples of mortality's triumph over everyone except oneself. The loneliness that defines immortal existence transcends normal human understanding of isolation, extending beyond simple absence of companionship to encompass existential separation from the entire human experience. Every relationship formed with mortal beings carries within it guarantee of eventual loss. Every emotional attachment destined to end in grief that cannot be resolved through one's own death. The accumulation of such losses across centuries would create psychological burden that grows heavier rather than lighter with time. Each new connection adding weight rather than joy to existence that has already exceeded its natural boundaries. Brooks' experience with his own form of pseudo-immortality provides insights into what eternal existence might actually feel like when experienced rather than simply theorized. His 50 years alone on a ghost ship, serving as preview of isolation that true immortality would extend across periods that make 5 decades seem like brief moments. The psychological strategies he developed for coping with absolute solitude, his relentless humor, his musical focus, his desperate maintenance of human customs, despite absence of human company, represent survival mechanisms that might prove inadequate when applied to timescales measured in centuries rather than decades. The relationship between memory and identity becomes particularly complex for immortal beings. The question of whether infinite memory storage is possible, or whether older experiences must be forgotten to make room for new ones, carrying implications that determine whether immortal existence represents continuous identity or series of connected but distinct personalities, sharing same physical form. The loss of early memories would mean that immortal beings eventually become strangers to their own past selves, while retention of all memories might create cognitive burden that makes coherent decision-making impossible. The physical requirements of immortal existence raise questions about whether such life represents genuine preservation of human experience or transformation into something that merely resembles humanity while lacking essential qualities. that make human existence meaningful or worthwhile. The maintenance of physical form across centuries might require constant renewal that gradually replaces original biological systems with artificial alternatives, creating beings that appear human while consisting entirely of reconstructed or manufactured components. The philosophical implications of immortality surgery extend beyond individual experience to encompass broader questions about the nature of death, the meaning of life, and the relationship between finite existence and infinite possibility. The elimination of death as natural boundary might remove essential element that gives individual choices weight and significance, transforming existence from precious opportunity into endless routine that lacks urgency or consequence. The social dynamics that would develop between immortal and mortal populations create potential for forms of inequality that exceed any divisions based on wealth, power, or privilege. Immortals would possess advantages in every sphere of human activity: education, experience, resource accumulation, relationship networks that would make competition with mortal individuals meaningless while creating pressures for others to seek immortality regardless of its costs or consequences. The environmental impact of immortal populations raises questions about sustainability that extend beyond resource consumption to encompass psychological and social carrying capacity of planetary systems designed around assumptions of natural population turnover through death and reproduction. The accumulation of immortal individuals over time might create societies where innovation, change, and adaptation become impossible due to dominance by beings whose perspectives were formed in earlier historical periods and who possess power to prevent developments that threaten their established positions. The ultimate tragedy of immortality lies not in death but in the discovery that eternal life, when actually experienced rather than simply desired, proves to be less reward than punishment, less transcendence than imprisonment within existence that has exceeded its natural boundaries and lost connection to sources of meaning that depend on limitation, vulnerability, and shared mortality. The surgery that promises to solve humanity's greatest problem may actually create problems so profound that death begins to seem like mercy rather than tragedy. As we contemplate the full implications of immortal existence, the psychological isolation that would result from outliving everyone one has ever loved, the moral corruption that might stem from gradual desensitization to human suffering, the political dangers posed by rulers whose power accumulates across centuries, the social inequality that would develop between immortal and mortal populations, the philosophical questions about whether unlimited existence retains qualities that make life worth living. We confront the possibility that humanity's greatest dream might actually represent its most terrible nightmare, that the victory over death might constitute defeat of everything that makes mortality precious, meaningful, and ultimately preferable to whatever alternative supernatural power might provide. The greatest horror embedded within the immortality surgery lies not in its cost, but in its fulfillment, not in the death required to grant eternal life, but in the discovery that eternal life, once granted, proves to be a form of existence so fundamentally different from human experience that it eliminates rather than preserves everything that made the original person worth saving in the first place. In the deepest chambers of Laugh Tale, where the final island's ancient secrets wait beneath layers of time and regret so profound that they drove the previous pirate king to laughter that may have been madness rather than mirth, there lies a truth so devastating that it transforms every assumption about heroism, destiny, and the price of ultimate knowledge into monuments of naivety that crumble before revelations too terrible for unprepared minds to process. The One Piece, that legendary treasure which has inspired countless souls to risk everything in pursuit of dreams that shimmer like mirages on distant horizons, may not represent reward for extraordinary achievement, but punishment for extraordinary curiosity, not celebration of human potential, but condemnation of human hubris, not the fulfillment of Joy Boy's greatest hope, but evidence of his most catastrophic failure. The ancient weapons that sleep beneath the world's surface, their names whispered in terror by those few scholars who understand their true significance, represent not tools of liberation, but instruments of annihilation, so complete that their mere existence poses questions about whether any cause, no matter how righteous, could justify the risk of their deployment. Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus embody humanity's eternal capacity for creating solutions that prove worse than the problems they were designed to solve. Innovations that demonstrate how quickly saviors can become destroyers when power exceeds wisdom by margins that make catastrophe inevitable rather than merely possible. Pluton's ability to erase islands from existence with single attacks speaks to engineering capabilities that transcend normal understanding of what naval warfare could accomplish, her destructive potential representing the application of ancient kingdom technology to military purposes that prioritize absolute victory over any consideration of proportional response or civilian protection. The blueprints that Frankie destroyed rather than allow to fall into government hands contained knowledge of shipbuilding techniques that could reshape global power balances through the simple expedient of making resistance to whoever possessed such vessels tactically impossible rather than merely difficult. The psychological impact on shipwrights, who understood Pluton's true capabilities, reveals depths of moral responsibility that extend far beyond simple technical competence into realms of ethical consideration that make normal engineering concerns seem trivial by comparison. Tom's execution stemmed not from building ships for pirates, but from creating a vessel whose destructive potential made its very existence threat to global stability, his death serving as reminder that some knowledge carries prices that exceed any individual's ability to pay while demanding payment nonetheless. The decision to scatter Pluton's blueprints across generations of Water 7 shipwrights represents an attempt to ensure that such devastating power could never again be concentrated in single location or under unified command. Yet this protective measure simultaneously created vulnerabilities that made the weapon's eventual reconstruction possible if sufficient pressure could be applied to those who possessed fragments of necessary knowledge. The protection of dangerous information through dispersal creates new categories of risk that may prove more difficult to manage than the original centralized threats such protection was designed to prevent. Poseidon's incarnation in the form of Princess Shirahoshi transforms abstract discussions of ancient weapons into immediate moral dilemmas involving living, breathing individual whose power to command sea kings makes her simultaneously the most valuable and most dangerous person in the world. Her gentle nature, her genuine desire to help others, her complete innocence regarding the implications of her inherited abilities. All of these qualities make her a sympathetic figure, while highlighting the tragic irony that world-ending power has been placed in hands least likely to wield it for destructive purposes. The Sea Kings themselves represent military force that operates according to principles entirely different from conventional naval power. Their intelligence, longevity, and natural weapons creating capabilities that no amount of traditional shipbuilding or tactical innovation could match. Their loyalty to Poseidon stems not from political allegiance or economic incentive, but from recognition of authority that transcends normal command structures to encompass something approaching religious devotion to figures they perceive as chosen by forces beyond human comprehension. The potential for Poseidon's power to reshape ocean geography through directing Sea King behavior raises possibilities that extend beyond military applications into realms of environmental manipulation that could affect global climate, patterns, trade routes, and the basic habitability of island nations that depend on predictable sea conditions for survival. The ability to create or eliminate currents, to direct marine life away from certain areas, to establish blockades that no conventional navy could break. These capabilities transform whoever controls Poseidon into de facto ruler of the world's oceans, with all that such control implies for global, political, and economic systems. The weight of carrying such power creates psychological burden that no individual should be expected to bear alone. Yet Shirahoshi's isolation as the only person capable of commanding such forces ensures that decisions about their deployment rest entirely with someone whose youth, inexperience, and sheltered upbringing provide inadequate preparation for choices that could determine the fate of entire civilizations. The support systems that surround her, while well-intentioned, cannot share the ultimate responsibility that comes with abilities that exceed anything her advisors have ever encountered or could fully understand. Uranus remains shrouded in mystery that may itself serve protective function. The absence of reliable information about the third ancient weapon, creating uncertainty that prevents potential users from developing strategies for its acquisition or deployment, while simultaneously allowing imagination to fill gaps in knowledge with speculation that may prove more terrifying than reality. The deliberate concealment of Uranus's location, capabilities, and activation requirements suggests awareness among those who hid it that some powers are too dangerous to risk falling into any hands, regardless of the moral character or noble intentions of potential wielders. The connection between ancient weapons and the Void Century's systematic erasure from historical records indicates that these devices played crucial roles in conflicts so devastating that even the victors found it necessary to hide evidence of what had occurred rather than celebrating their triumph over inferior opponents. The winners of wars typically preserve detailed accounts of their victories to serve as both warning to potential enemies and inspiration for future generations. The complete suppression of Void Century information suggests outcomes so horrific that they shamed even those who benefited from their consequences. Joy Boy's role in these ancient conflicts, his connection to the weapons that could destroy the world, and his ultimate failure to achieve whatever goals justified risking such complete devastation, creates psychological profile of someone whose good intentions became pathway to consequences that exceeded any reasonable definition, acceptable cost. The laughter that gives Laugh Tale its name may have emerged not from joy at discovering treasure, but from recognition of irony so profound that it broke the mind that comprehended it fully. The realization that efforts to create a better world had instead created means for ending all worlds. The message that Joy Boy left for future generations carries within it weight of confession that might prove more crushing than inspiring, acknowledgement of failures so complete that they transformed heroic legacy into cautionary tale about dangers of pursuing noble goals through methods that exceed moral constraints governing reasonable action. The apology embedded within his final communication suggests awareness that his mistakes created problems that could not be solved within his lifetime, while imposing responsibility for managing those consequences upon descendants who had no voice in creating them. The ancient kingdom's destruction may have resulted not from external conquest, but from internal recognition that their technological and military capabilities had exceeded safe boundaries. Their civilization choosing extinction over the risk that their weapons might fall into hands willing to use them for purposes that violated every principle that had motivated their creation. The systematic elimination of their own people, technology, and historical records represents ultimate form of responsibility taking that prioritizes global safety over cultural preservation or individual survival. The poneglyphs that preserve fragments of this history serve as both memorial and warning, their placement throughout the world, ensuring that future generations would possess sufficient information to understand what had occurred, while lacking detailed knowledge that might enable repetition of the same mistakes. The selective preservation of certain information, while deliberately omitting crucial details, creates educational framework designed to inspire wisdom rather than provide instruction manual for recreating ancient weapons or repeating anciennes erreurs. Roger's laughter upon discovering the true nature of the One Piece reveals psychological response to revelation so overwhelming that normal emotional categories prove inadequate for processing its implications. The specific choice of laughter rather than tears, rage, or despair suggests recognition of cosmic joke so profound that it transcends personal tragedy to encompass universal commentary on human nature, ambition, and the inevitable gap between intention and outcome that defines every attempt to improve conditions through application of power. The timing that made Roger's crew too early may refer not to political circumstances or technological readiness, but to moral preparation required for making decisions about whether ancient weapons should be reactivated, destroyed, or left dormant until humanity develops sufficient wisdom to wield such power responsibly. The suggestion that Luffy's generation might be on time implies that moral evolution necessary for handling ultimate responsibility has finally occurred. Yet the evidence for such evolution remains disturbingly absent from contemporary global politics. The choice that awaits whoever finally reaches Laugh Tale and discovers the complete truth about Joy Boy's legacy, the ancient weapons, and the real cost of the Void Century's conflicts may not involve claiming treasure, but deciding whether to bear the psychological burden of complete knowledge while working to prevent repetition of ancient mistakes, or to follow Joy Boy's example by taking responsibility for failures that exceed any individual's capacity to address adequately. The possibility that the One Piece represents not reward but test, not treasure but trap, not celebration of achievement, but confrontation with consequences that previous generations were unable or unwilling to face transforms. Every step of Luffy's journey toward the final island, into movement closer to revelation that might destroy rather than fulfill the dreams that have sustained him throughout his adventures. As we contemplate the full implications of what Joy Boy may have left behind, weapons capable of ending civilization, guilt too profound for single conscience to bear, responsibility for preventing repetition of mistakes that destroyed entire cultures, knowledge that transforms heroic legends into cautionary tales about the dangers of good intentions, corrupted by insufficient wisdom, we confront the possibility that the greatest treasure in the world may actually represent the blank, greatest burden, that achieving ultimate success may require accepting ultimate failure, that reaching the end of the greatest adventure ever undertaken may mark the beginning of the most terrible responsibility ever imposed upon human conscience. The final irony embedded within this darkest interpretation of the One Piece lies in recognition that those most worthy of discovering such treasure may be precisely those least capable of bearing its weight. that the pure hearts and noble intentions required to reach Laughtale become liabilities rather than assets when confronted with truths that challenge every assumption about heroism, justice, and the relationship between individual dreams and collective responsibility for consequences that extend far beyond any single lifetime's capacity to address or resolve. And so we reach the end of our journey through the shadows that lurk beneath One Piece's brilliant surface. These theories, dark though they may be, remind us that even in a world of dreams and adventure, light exists only because darkness defines its borders. Whether Blackbeard truly consumes his enemies' hearts, whether Shanks harbors ultimate betrayal, or whether Joy Boy's legacy carries unbearable guilt, these possibilities add weight to every smile, depth to every friendship, meaning to every choice our heroes make. Perhaps the true horror lies not in these theories being true, but in how they reflect the real world's darkest corners that Oda masterfully weaves into his tale. The strength of One Piece lies in confronting these shadows while never losing faith in humanity's capacity for goodness, growth, and genuine connection. Rest now, fellow dreamer, knowing that even in the face of such darkness, the light of dreams burns eternal. Tomorrow brings new chapters, new possibilities, and new reasons to believe that hope can triumph over even the deepest shadows. Sweet dreams await beyond even the darkest theories.